releases in error.
Dr. Caroline-Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I understand a total of 441, which over a 2-year period is the worst on record and means that in less than 24 months, Labour have released more prisoners in error than in the previous 6 years combined. It's a disgrace. Can I ask the Minister another question? How many of those released in error early were convicted of rape?
Justice Secretary.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, she wasn't listening to the figures that I gave. We are actually seeing a reduction in the numbers because of the review that I asked Dame Linoas to lead. We are implementing those recommendations to see the system coming down. But I've got to tell you, who left us with the mess? Who saw 800 releases under their watch? When did they come to Parliament and update them? When did they set up a review? They did absolutely nothing. We've got a paper-based system. That's why we're introducing digital ID.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hundreds of prisoners released in error under this government is a disgrace. But more concerning are the thousands it will have been an error to release. He didn't answer the previous question. Let's try another. As we heard in this House yesterday, child groomers and rapists are due to be let out early, years early, with their victims being informed by letter. So will the Minister tell my constituents exactly why, under this government, dangerous criminals will be in their communities rather than in prison?
Because you let the prison system.
Because you almost broke the prison system. You built just 500 places in 14 years, and we had to fix that system. You had 17 different forms of guidance on early release in the last year, all done in secret. That's why we introduced the sentencing bill. That's why it got royal assent in January. And that's why we're doing everything we can to build more prison places, 14,000 prison places by 2031.
Can I just gently say to Justice Secretary, when you say you, I am not owning any responsibility for any of this. Ashley Dalton.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 6, 7 and 20 together. This government is supporting victims with over £1 billion of funding, including £499 million for safe housing for victims of abuse and the largest ever investment of £550 million in victim support services over the next 3 years. And under the Victims Code, all victims are entitled to referral to victim support services.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited the Liberty Centre in my constituency, a fantastic charitable organisation that supports individuals and families who have been affected by domestic abuse and violence. They told me they could fill their refuge places 3 times over, but they don't have the resources to do that. Can the Minister tell us what the government is doing to ensure that voluntary and charitable organisations that do such excellent work in this space are continued to be supported and sustained?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising the hugely vital work that they do. Local authorities in England have a statutory duty to assess and address the need for support with safe accommodation for all domestic abuse victims, including children who need to flee their home. Lancashire County Council has been allocated more than £3.3 million to support important local services such as those delivered by the Liberty Centre. And it's part of the £499 million that this government has committed to councils to commission life-saving accommodation support for victims as part of our mission to halve violence against women and girls within a decade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Gravesham, I recently visited New Maltings Child Contact Centre in Chalk, hosted by the City Praise Centre, which I think is the only one in North Kent, which provides a calm, safe place for parents to meet their children. And this is on Saturdays, 8 to 9 every month. Given the vital role that local organisations play in supporting families connect and reconnect safely, what steps has the Minister taken to ensure services like these are more widely available?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Child contact services provide safe and neutral spaces for children to meet parents or other family members that they don't live with as part of supervised or supported contact arrangements. I thank my honourable friend for highlighting the work that they do at the New Malting Centre. This government is committed to supporting this sector and provides £450,000 a year to assist supported child contact centres in England and Wales, as well as funding their national association for its work on training, standards and monitoring.
Melanie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Denise Farman, the brilliant Denise Farman, has been the Chief Officer of Women's Aid in Grimsby for the last 25 years, and she has pioneered move-on accommodation for those women and children leaving refuge to start to build the foundations of their new life. And it's been remarkably successful, but she has noted and raised with me that across North East Lincolnshire there are over 2,000 empty properties. And I wonder, has the department had any discussions with MHCLG about how we can better integrate the projects like Denise's for this move on and supported accommodation and linking it up with an empty home strategy?
Minister.
It's really powerful to hear about the impact that Women's Aid are having in her constituency. I visited the Black Country Women's Aid and Solace Women's Aid in London and listened to victims and survivors who told me what it meant to them to have been provided with a place of safety, of sanctuary. And the government strategy for halving violence against women and girls is truly cross-departmental. And the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Authorities committed the £499 million to councils for safe accommodation for victims. The government does want to see more empty homes brought back into use and intends to strengthen the ability of local authorities to do so.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with a constituent whose child was subject to repeated sexual abuse. I have to say that she found access to justice very difficult, still awaiting trial, but now fears that the accuser will not be found fit to trial and will be subject to a trial on the facts, and is now fearful that if the accuser is found guilty on the facts, will not be subject to appropriate sanctions, for example, being subject to DBS checks. What reassurances can the Minister give my constituent about the resources allocated to such prosecutions, both by the Police and Criminal Justice Service, about whether the bar is correct for whether somebody is appropriate to stand trial and what sanctions will be applied, because this constituent is very fearful this person will be at liberty in the wider community subsequent to conviction.
Under this government, the prosecution and convictions for child sexual abuse has gone up, but I would absolutely be willing to meet with the honourable member to discuss this case.
Colin Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Children are often the forgotten in the situation where abuse has taken place in a household. Following the brutal murder of Natalie McNally and her unborn son Dean in my constituency in December 2022, why does the law still fail to recognise the death of an unborn baby caused by criminal violence as a separate offence? Because on the day Stephen McCullough murdered Natalie, he murdered her unborn child too, yet no conviction, no acknowledgement that baby Dean was of inherent value. Will the government commit to reviewing this law and meet with me to discuss it?
Minister.
I'm very happy to meet with my honourable friend on this issue, but domestic violence and all the ramifications that it comes is absolutely the priority of this government, which is why we are determined to halve violence against women and girls within a decade.
Somebody else. Josh Babrin.
Mr. Speaker, there are some in this House who disgracefully believe that it is for the England football team to prevent domestic abuse, whereas we all know that it is for perpetrators to stop their abuse. But in terms of those who are making more positive and valuable contributions to this space, will the Minister join me in celebrating the amazing work of Eastbourne survivors who support folks on an entirely voluntary basis to recover from the abuse that they have experienced throughout their lives?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and absolutely will join him in celebrating the work of Eastbourne survivors. He is absolutely right that domestic violence is a choice for perpetrators. It is not about the score or what should happen when the final whistle goes, and to frame it in any other way does a significant disservice in allowing perpetrators to try and deflect from what is their actions.
Shadow Minister Dr Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One thing that we know women and children will be contacting victim support services about right now is the letters they're receiving telling them that their abusers are going to get out of prison earlier. Victim support supports more than 814,000 victims every year, and their CEO, Katie Kempton, had this to say: having already endured long waits for justice, often with their lives on hold, and the distress of going to court, many will feel shocked and frightened to learn that offenders may now be released months or even years earlier than expected. She's right, isn't she?
Minister.
It's absolutely important that there is transparency and communication with victims, unlike what we saw under the Conservatives. Then when they were letting people out, they did so with almost no notice, if any at all. I absolutely acknowledge concerns that victims will come. But what is not in the interests of victims is having a prison that is so overcrowded that perpetrators cannot actually be housed in cells. It is an absolutely disgrace what the last to our prisons. It's an absolute disgrace that they left them so full that the entire criminal justice system was at risk of collapsing. And it's right that yet again it's this government clearing up their mess.
Dr Kieran Mullen.
Wholehearted agreement with the Minister that transparency is really important. One thing that would help victim support and other organisations to plan to respond to this is knowing how many people are getting out and what offences they've committed. But just like us, Mr Speaker, they're in the dark. Can I thank you, Mr Speaker? Your intervention yesterday did prompt the department into publishing a response to my question about this, but it wasn't an answer. In fact, shockingly, the government officially now says it doesn't know how many people it's letting out in September. So if the Minister and the government refuse to tell us now, can they at least let victim support services and victims know when they will tell this House, victim support services and the wider public how many perpetrators of serious offences they're letting out and when that will start happening?
Minister.
This government has published the Victims' Impact Assessment on this. It is ensuring that people are communicated with. But what is absolutely essential is that it has the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which is going to ensure that we are absolutely pursuing perpetrators, that we are supporting victims, and that we are stopping violence in the first place. This government, yet again, is clearing up their mess, whether it's to do with prisons, whether it's to do with backlogs, whether it's to do with the investment we are making in supporting victims.
Max Wilkins.
Number 8, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
The government is reforming the family justice system to better support families and children. We're rolling out the successful child-focused courts nationally. That means that in Northamptonshire, Coventry and Warwickshire, Northumbria, North Durham, Cleveland and South Durham, Lancashire, Cumbria, York and North Yorkshire and Cheshire and Merseyside, you have a child-focused court coming to a court near you. Developing a cross-system family justice strategy and legislating for new child safety measures that ensure child welfare continues to be prioritised.
Max Wilkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When family courts decide that care is to be split between parents 50-50, we might expect that fair financial arrangements follow. But when courts make this ruling and decisions made by the Child Maintenance Service, based on which parent is the recipient of child benefit, happen, they often mean that one parent finds out that they're significantly worse off than the other. So will ministers have a word with their colleagues in DWP to ensure the justice system and CMS work more closely to achieve financial fairness for both parents in cases where courts rule for 50-50 care splits?
Minister.
Well, in individual cases, it's a matter for the judiciary how those financial settlements are made. But I agree with him that when it comes to family court, as in so many cases, the family court is downstream of decisions that have been made elsewhere. And it's quite right that there be join-up between governments. So I'm happy to take away his direction that we, if you like, liaise with DWP colleagues to ensure that child maintenance is addressed fairly.
Fanton Glenn.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can the Minister please reassure me that we remain committed to repealing the presumption of contact in family courts within this Parliament to bring full justice to the 67 children murdered at the hands of abusive ex-partners with whom contact should have never been granted?
Yeah. Minister.
I thank my friend for his question. We are resolute and committed to repealing the presumption of parental involvement in the Children Act 1989. The campaigning efforts of the likes of Claire Throssell have been little short of heroic, and we will redouble our efforts to ensure that the repeal of that presumption comes about through the Courts and Tribunals Bill.
Amends.
Question 10, Mr Speaker.
The Secretary.
One of the first things I announced when appointed Secretary of State for Justice was a £40 million extra investment to strengthen prison security, including £10 million for counter-drone measures like netting and wire. And I recently visited Woodhill Prison to look at how we're tackling this growing threat and committed a further £35 million to install heavy-duty grills on windows at 17 of our most high-risk prison sites.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. Could he also outline what learnings the government has taken from international expertise to develop and shape counter-drone measures in UK prisons?
Well, I'm hugely grateful to my honourable friend for asking the question. She knows, because of the war in Ukraine, that drone technology is moving at pace, which is why when I was in Ukraine in January, we announced that we're working with the UK Defence Innovation and Innovative Fund to set up an international business competition to ensure that the prison service is keeping up at pace with moving technology. It's also right to say that we're working with our French and Italian colleagues who also are experiencing the same threat. And I've spoken to Justice Ministers about how we share best practice.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The use of drones by criminal gangs to smuggle contraband into prisons is of particular concern, especially in open prisons like Kirkham in my constituency, where there is a vast amount of open estate to be able to drop them off. Whilst I was Police Commissioner for Lancashire, we invested in counter-drone units, which the brilliant thing is, they use signals to jam the drones, which forces the drones to shut down and then actually returns them to the point where they were deployed from, often leading the police to the place where the criminals are hiding. Would the Secretary of State consider working closely with police forces who are deploying this technology to use it more broadly in countering the drone threat in the UK?
Grateful to the honourable gentleman. He's absolutely right. The Director General of the National Crime Agency's directed police chiefs to work with the prison service to jointly tackle the threat from criminal drones. Recently, we saw this in a large-scale joint operation which resulted in over 200 arrests, and he's absolutely right that that blocking technology is available to the system. I was in Doncaster visiting our specialist unit that does this work, often obviously at night, to ensure that we're bringing down those drones.
Ian Hamilton.
Question number 11, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
The law governing wills hasn't changed substantially since 1837. It's in that context that the Government welcomes the Law Commission's comprehensive and thorough review. We'll be taking our time to consider it and respond in due course. We see innovations like electronic wills could improve accessibility and increase the number of those who are making wills and putting them and their loved ones in a more secure position.
Fabian Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2018, I began my campaign to abolish the rule which stipulates that in England and Wales, remarriage revokes any previous will. It's clear that such a rule is no longer fit for purpose and opens the door to abuse, where unscrupulous individuals often marry vulnerable people, which enables them to inherit their estate upon death. Will the Government now commit to accepting the Law Commission's recommendation to abolish this archaic rule?
Minister.
Well, I commend the Right Honourable Gentleman's work in terms of looking at how we can combat predatory marriages and those who prey on the vulnerable. The Law Commission's recommendation to remove the rule that marriage revokes a will is well evidenced. We will take a holistic look at this, but certainly it's something that we will be considering very carefully.
Jim Shalom.
Speaker, first of all, can I welcome the Honourable Member for Leeds North East back after his operation. It's good to see him again, and I wish him a speedy recovery. Thank you, Minister, for the answer. Nat, what steps is the Minister's Department taking to ensure the insights and the drafting expertise from the Modernising Wills Law report with the Northern Ireland Executive to ensure that families in Northern Ireland can benefit from similar modernised protections against predatory marriage and updated with legislation? Thanks so much.
As we consider the Law Commission's recommendations, obviously we will consider how that might lead to law changes and law reform right across the United Kingdom, but where, of course, matters are devolved, we obviously respect that as well.
Question 12, sir.
Minister.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 12 and 21 together. Knife crime is a serious offence and the courts rightly treat it as such. Immediate custodial sentences continue to be widely used, particularly for repeat possession, with sentence lengths increasing over time. Alongside this, the Government has strengthened powers through the Crime and Policing Act, including tougher penalties and new offences to keep communities safe. No one should believe a word the opposition say on knife crime. They broke their promise that anyone caught carrying a knife would face a presumption of immediate imprisonment, and they slashed neighbourhood police numbers as knife crime soared under their watch.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but the latest figures show that the average custodial sentence for an adult knife or offensive weapon offence is just over 8 months. But since March, the Sentencing Act has meant there's a presumption that any sentence below 12 months should be suspended. So what action is the Minister actually taking to make sure that that presumption doesn't effectively decriminalise many knife offences?
Mr Speaker, I'm incredibly proud of the work of this government on knife crime, whether that's taking zombie knives off the streets, whether that's ensuring that early interventions for children caught carrying a knife is used more effectively. That's why knife crime is going down under this government when it soared under the last government. On the presumption introduced under the Sentencing Act, 2 points, Mr Speaker, if I may. Firstly, it is just that, a presumption. The Conservatives keep talking about scrapping short sentences. Nonsense. It's a presumption. Secondly, when was the presumption first proposed? By the Conservative government in the final few years in office. They now oppose the very policies they were suggesting.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Speaker. The fact is that more and more young people are carrying knives, supposedly to defend themselves. That leads to knife crime in our streets. Certainly in my constituency, it's a serious problem, particularly between young people, and we've experienced stabbings in schools now, which is really disastrous. So the clear issue here is those that carry knives and caught carrying knives should face a custodial sentence to deter them, because unless we have a deterrence to this, people will continue to carry knives, and when threatened, they'll use them. So will the Minister take the action that's required to make sure that the message goes out, if you carry a knife, you're likely to end up in prison?
Minister.
The honourable member is absolutely right that deterrent plays an important factor, and he raises important cases that he's had in his constituency, and equally in the neighbouring constituency. Just last year, a young boy was murdered by a knife crime in Sheffield, and it's something very close to my mind as well as a constituency MP, as well as my duties as a minister. This is a long-standing problem in terms of education, early intervention. He's right that custodial sentences and a deterrent plays a part of that, but it's much more widespread, and we need to be careful about those interventions early on, particularly with children who are carrying knives, because they feel that it's something that they need to do to protect them. Not in every case, I'm not convinced that a custodial sentence is the right solution.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 10 days ago, 17-year-old Jamal Coombs was killed in my constituency as a result of knife crime. Every young person deserves to live safely and also to fulfil their potential. His life was taken too soon. So I would like to ask the Minister, what actions is this government taking right now to have a more coordinated approach with both schools, with public health and the police to prevent this awful tragedy, but also to ensure that our young people feel safe and they do not feel the need to have to carry a knife?
Well, can I place on behalf of the government my condolences to Jamal's family. Every incident of knife crime is a tragedy, and I send that on behalf of the government. We are undertaking, through our plan to halve knife crime over the next decade, a comprehensive cross-government approach to reduce violence and protect communities. That includes measures such as banning dangerous weapons, tightening online sale rules, which have a real effect. We're funding more targeted enforcement activity, in particular in the 280 hotspots that we know, because the data suggests this is where knife crime is happening. We are making sure that our interventions are focused there. There's a lot more to do. And just because knife crime is coming down, we are not celebrating for a minute. Every incident is a tragedy, and we'll continue to work hard to bring those down.
McCarthy. Mr Speaker, I know you're a great supporter of the Parliamentary Knowledge Scheme, and next Thursday they will be bringing MPs to Empire Fighting Chance, which is a boxing gym in my constituency, which has been involved in the government and Idris Elba-led anti-knife crime coalition. Does the Minister agree that listening to youth perspectives is crucial in the battle to reduce knife crime, and that we should be commending the young people at Empire Fighting Chance for their involvement in what is often a deeply personal issue to them? They've lost friends and family to knife crime, but they really want to be part of the efforts to address it.
Minister. My humble friend is absolutely right that community initiatives are at the heart of how we confront knife crime and indeed crime more generally. I credit the boxing gym in her constituency. I know Dinnington Boxing do great work in mine as well, and I've been there on numerous occasions. Just last month we published the Youth Justice White Paper, and at its heart is ensuring that we involve children's voices in making sure that we understand as policymakers in this place and indeed in government that our interventions are tailored to the challenges and issues that children are facing. She's absolutely right, and we're getting on with the job of doing it.
Question number 13, sir.
Minister.
The government, Mr Speaker, is committed to greater transparency and access to justice in our courts. Transcripts are an important part of that, and I know there has been a lot of cross-party campaigning on this issue. Victims of sexual offences and bereaved families of homicide can already request a free copy of sentencing remarks. From spring 2027, eligibility will be extended so that all victims can request them.
Testament.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm particularly keen that this is progressed at speed, because the eye-watering fees for victims who want to get their transcripts are really, really expensive. My constituent's a victim of domestic violence, and her barrister now needs transcripts of her hearing in the family court to appeal against procedural irregularities, errors in the published judgment, but the transcript is going to cost her thousands and thousands of pounds. So can I ask the Minister to address the gross inequality and waive court transcript fees as soon as she possibly can for all victims, including the family courts, of course with the requisite redactions to protect anonymity of the parties and to ensure robust justice, transparency and fairness for all?
Minister.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about her constituent's case. I think the fact is that technology in this area is potentially a game changer. But of course, as with all technological adoption, particularly in the justice arena, we've got to ensure there is accuracy for the very reason she says. It's got to be accurate, where there are redactions to protect individual participants in the case, and of course to ensure reporting restrictions. That's all got to be done safely. But I can assure her that the Ministry of Justice is progressing at pace with its AI adoption, which I think is going to be a game changer in the years to come.
As Mr Speaker, I listened carefully to what the Minister just said there. Court transcripts are important to a victim's sense of justice served, but does she agree with me that access to this really important information should never be dependent on the victim's ability to pay?
Minister.
Look, equality before the law should mean just that. And when we talk about barriers to access to justice, whether that's the cost of representation, which we try to address through legal aid, the cost of transcripts, he's absolutely right that that is a really important principle. In the current context, the targeted approach that we have taken, prioritising those victims of the most serious crimes and now extending the eligibility so that all victims can request court transcripts through the Sentencing Act from spring 2027 is a big step forward. I hope that developments in technology will enable us to lower the costs and make that freely available for all in due course.
Jess Brown for the Liberal Democrats, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charlotte Mayer will never be able to access her transcript because her case was heard in the Magistrates' Court when no recording was made. The government is seeking to address this, but Charlotte has continued campaigning for all victims of crime so that they can access free transcripts, given some are currently still quoted thousands of pounds. Her campaign, Open Justice for All, is calling on the government to go further and faster to make the justice system fair, transparent and open. So will the Minister assure the House today, and this is a cross-party issue, and I know a lot of the backbenchers feel very passionately in her party about it, that the job is not done and it is their desire that court transcripts will eventually all be made free and accessible for all victims?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for Chichester, who I know is a great advocate for this. I've also had the pleasure of meeting with Charlotte on a number of occasions, and I know what an important campaign this is. She's absolutely right. The government's commitment to have audio recording and the capital investments we're making to enable that means that change is coming soon and fast, and we will look to go as far as we are able whilst preserving the accuracy of those transcripts.
Dr. Luke Evans on topicals.
Topical one, Mr. Speaker.
Justice Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, 1 in 5 homicides are domestic homicides, with women and girls overwhelmingly the victims of these brutal crimes. Mothers, sisters, daughters, like Ellie Gould, Poppy Devi Waterhouse and Megan Newborough, who were cruelly murdered by their current or former partners. Yet the gravity of these crimes is not always fully reflected. Under the current sentencing framework, higher starting points place particular weight on a weapon being taken to the scene with intent, whereas domestic homicides often happen in the home using weapons already present. So today I can announce that we will introduce a new 25-year starting point for domestic murders, a change made possible thanks to the government's grip on the prison population through the Sentencing Act. Can I pay tribute to Ellie, Poppy and Megan's mothers, to the member for Pontypridd and Birmingham Yardley, mothers Carol, Julie and Elaine, who campaigned tirelessly for this change, which will mean that those who kill their partner or former partner spend longer in prison.
Dr. Luke Evans.
And the Fuller inquiry called for strengthening of the safeguards and the law around looking after those who've deceased. But we saw last week in the mortuary report coming out of Nottingham Hospital some of the abuses and horrors of bodies mislabelled, even left decomposing. So does the Secretary of State share my concerns that this could be a pattern across the system? And will he speak to the Health Secretary to look into this to make sure that it certainly isn't?
Justice Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and he's absolutely right. This was devastating, absolutely horrific, what we have heard. And I will discuss this issue with the Secretary of State for Health. They obviously have responsibility for human tissue. We have responsibility for the coroner's service and the law around death, and we will work together on this issue.
Laura Kurtz.
This month I was delighted to award my Community Champion Award to Afzal Hussain. After his best friend was stabbed and died in 2021, he set up In This Together Bucks, which has now removed more than 1,500 knives from the streets, while also addressing underlying causes of knife crime through mentoring, mediation and support for families. Will the Minister join me in congratulating Afzal on his work, and does he agree that organisations like his in our communities are vital for tackling knife crime?
Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend and pay tribute to her constituent Afzal Khan as well for the work that he does alongside Adele Webb. She's absolutely right. We've heard in this morning's session in the Chamber about the tragic consequences of knife crime. And it's so important that as a government, but also wider society, we work together to do anything we can to make sure that we reduce it.
Nick Timothy, Shadow Justice Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government referred the sentence of the teenage gang rapists who attacked 2 schoolgirls to the Court of Appeal as unduly lenient. But the government also says it wants to increase the age of criminal responsibility, and the Bar Council has said that age should be 14. That's 1 year older than the age of one of those rapists, proof that young criminals can commit terrible crimes. So will the Justice Secretary rule out increasing the age of criminal responsibility to 14?
Justice Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, but can I say to him that when the Bar Council do a detailed piece of work it is the responsibility of the Secretary of State to look closely at what they have recommended, and that is what I will do in the coming months. And I'm sure when that process is concluded, we can have this discussion in a serious way. And I'd urge him to be serious. He takes to Twitter often on these issues, but I do think we should take the Bar Council of England and Wales seriously.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You will be alarmed to know that last year in England, 1 in 7 NHS staff experienced a physical attack while on shift. Our paramedics, doctors, nurses, police force and firefighters go to work every day to save lives, yet face unimaginable abuse. We have to clamp down on those who perpetrate these vile attacks. Will the Secretary of State commit to reviewing sentencing guidelines for such heinous crimes?
Minister.
Well, these are absolutely shocking figures, and may I pay tribute to all NHS staff and indeed all frontline public service workers who often put their bodies on the line quite literally. I meet with the Chair of the Sentencing Council regularly to discuss issues. I will be raising this one with her as well.
Jess Brown for the Liberal Democrats, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Guardian reported last week on the case of a US Air Force officer accused of drugging, strangling and raping a British woman in his apartment. Now, although the incident took place off-duty, off-base and on English soil, the case was removed from the jurisdiction of the English courts and it was instead tried by US court-martial at RAF Lakenheath with an all-male panel, all from his base. Does the Minister agree with me victims of crimes on English soil should see justice served in our justice system?
Justice Secretary.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that halving violence against women and girls is a decade mission for this government. This case is extremely concerning and our thoughts, of course, are with the victim, Sarah. But given the cross-agency nature of this case, my officials are working across government and we're raising this case with the US government to establish the full facts.
Samantha Niblett.
Mr. Speaker, a constituent of mine in South Derbyshire, Sarah Page, is Associate Professor for Social Justice at Staffordshire University that I visited last week. She and her colleagues told me about their From Harm to Hope research. It highlights the unique challenges women face, including being held far from family due to limited number of women's prisons. They also raise concerns that the national drug strategy is not sufficiently gender sensitive, particularly in addressing the impact of child abuse and domestic abuse on women in the criminal justice system. Will my honourable friend meet with Sarah and me and her colleagues to ensure that these women's specific issues are properly reflected in our criminal justice system?
I thank my honourable friend for that. I'm very happy to meet with her and indeed her constituent. There are issues about the women's estate. That's why Lord Timpson set up the Women's Justice Board, which is considering these. We are determined to bring down the population where it's safe to do so for, in terms of women's prisoners. There's a lot more work to do, but we are making progress.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of women are secretly filmed on a night out. These clips are then put online, accompanied by horrible misogynistic comments. They're viewed millions of times and often make a profit. What steps is this department doing to close the current gaps in legislation to stop this vile abuse of women on a night out?
Minister.
Non-consensual, intimate images and the kind of images that the Honourable Lady is talking about are absolutely disgusting, and this government has taken action to ensure that they will be taken down from being online within 48 hours, as well as our banning of deep fakes. We want to ensure that women are safe, whether it's in their homes, on their streets or online, and there is still more action to take.
Amanda Martin.
Recently, Mr. Speaker, a domestic abuse victim came into my office scared and considering returning to her abusive ex-partner because she had nowhere else to go. I intervened and Portsmouth City Council found her a flat, but it was in an area known to be regularly frequented by her abuser. When she raised this with the council, they said if she did not accept the property, they would withdraw their support. I intervened again and the council agreed to find her somewhere to live, but she is still waiting for a safe place. What steps is the Minister taking to join up support across national and local government so that domestic abuse victims do not fall through the cracks?
Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for all of her actions in supporting her constituent? Local authorities in England are legally required to assess and address the need for safe accommodation for domestic abuse victims who need to flee their home. All our thoughts will be with her constituent, who I hope secures suitable, safe accommodation soon. But considering how tenacious and determined I know her Member of Parliament is, I hope that is very soon indeed.
Further House, Edward Lee.
The Secretary of State knows
how fond I am of him. I am personally, and I want him to keep his job. So will he please his new boss, the MP for Makerfield, virtually the entire legal establishment, and the English people, whose only wish is to keep their 1,000-year-old right to trial by jury of their peers when their liberty is at stake? Justice Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the Father of the House. He might not have noticed, but he made me blush. He knows that the right to a fair trial and the component of that that requires a jury is an important right, and we're not abolishing it. But we are seeking to bring down this backlog so that people can get swift justice. And we're making a decision that's been made previously by other Prime Ministers, including Margaret Thatcher, just to change the threshold, but to ensure that justice is done. And I think it is also important to acknowledge the tremendous work done by our magistrates.
Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's £500 million of investment to victim services, which is a serious investment after years of neglect. In my own constituency, Staffordshire Women's Aid have been supporting survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence for up to 50 years. And for every £1 spent, we do know that £10.80 to return to the public purse on victim support services. So can the Minister tell me what steps are being taken to ensure brilliant local organisations like Staffordshire Women's Aid can access this funding so that no area falls between the gaps?
Minister.
I've met victims and survivors supported by Women's Aid in other parts of the country who've been able to rebuild their lives, and it's inspiring that Staffordshire Women's Aid have been supporting survivors for 50 years. Staffordshire Police and Crime Commissioner is receiving over £4.5 million over the next 2 years for victim support services, and that's additional to the funding that councils get to provide safe accommodation for victims, including for refuges like those run by Women's Aid.
Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Magistrates are the backbone of the justice system, yet magistrates in Worcestershire increasingly talk to me about the pressures on their workload and the difficulty of attracting new volunteers. What steps is the government taking to increase the attractiveness of the magistracy?
Minister.
Well, I agree with the right honourable gentleman that our magistrates are the backbone of our justice system. I meet with them the length and breadth of the land. I've met with the Magistrates Association. We've got to make this more attractive. It's why our reform of their expenses is so important, allowing for greater flexibility. It's why the transformation of our application process and also the training that magistrates receive to make it a more attractive place for people to volunteer their time. But I want to put on record we're incredibly grateful to our army of volunteers who keep the justice system going.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rugby Prison in my constituency is undergoing a £70 million expansion. The main prison car park across the road is on the A620, a very, very busy road. On the 1st of December last year, prison officer Philip Tetley was knocked down and killed as he crossed the road to get to work, leaving his wife, Eve, and 7 children. Eve Tetley is now campaigning for a crossing to prevent such an awful accident happening again. Will the Minister meet with myself and Eve in order to discuss this further?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend, neighbouring MP as well. My thoughts are, of course, with the family of Philip Tetley and Eve in particular. I know that stretch of road very well. It's on my commute to Retford Station, and I'm very happy to meet with her and Eve to do anything I can to help.
Joy Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent was repeatedly sexually abused by a family member who received 4 concurrent 28-year prison sentences and threatened to murder her during the trial. After serving about 10 years, he was transferred to the Netherlands, where he was released immediately. My constituent lives in fear he will return to the UK and carry out the threats he made towards her. Will the Minister meet with me to discuss this complex case and commit to reviewing international prisoner transfer arrangements when the practical effect is that dangerous offenders are released far earlier than intended by the UK courts?
Minister.
Well, can I thank the honourable member for her question? Raises very serious points. I'm happy to meet with her and her constituent, of course. We are determined to bring down the number of foreign national offenders in our prisons. We need to do that safely, and indeed, just recently we've signed come to a memorandum of understanding with Latvia. We've had a similar agreement with Italy, and I've been speaking with officials at the Netherlands to try and pursue a deal there too. It is important we do that safely, and I'm very happy to have further discussions with her about that.
Jacob Collier.
Speaker. Streetwise was set up by Danny Mondesir after the tragic stabbing of Oliver Freckleton in 2021. Streetwise undertake targeted work with young people to prevent knife crime and carrying and youth offending. With the new cross-government knife crime strategy, can the Minister say how programmes like this will be used to cut youth knife crime offending?
The Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. Our Halving Knife Crime Plan seeks to give young people the best start in life, stop those at risk of turning to knife crime and ensure perpetrators are caught and brought to justice. I've been out with a number of community groups over the last few weeks to see this work in action. He's absolutely right. It's good to see the numbers beginning to fall, but there is more work to do over the coming months and years.
Codman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent is here. Her ex-husband sexually assaulted her children and attempted to murder them and her by removing the brake pads from her car. Yet the court appeared to listen more to the abuser's allegation of parental alienation syndrome, a concept discredited by the WHO, than her evidence. The abuser today has unsupervised access to the children. What steps will the government take to prevent discredited concepts obstructing criminal justice, leaving children at risk of rape and murder?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising such a moving case and pay tribute to his constituent who's here today. Let's be absolutely clear. The government's position is that parental alienation has no evidential basis and is a totally discredited concept. We are working carefully with the Family Procedure Rule Committee to limit the instruction of unregulated experts, including those who hold themselves out as parental alienation experts. I hope that that will ring the sorts of changes that will prevent this sort of thing in future.
Thanks, Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I welcome the announcement from the Deputy Prime Minister today on changing the disparity of sentencing for domestic homicides? I know that Carol, Julie and Elaine have campaigned tirelessly following the murders of their daughters for this change, and it will make a huge difference to how violence against women and girls is treated in this country. Can I implore the Deputy Prime Minister, the first in the line of 7 Lord Chancellors that the campaigners have met with, that has actually committed to doing this, to do this as soon as possible, and there is this Labour government that is committed to tackling violence against women and girls.
The Secretary.
Well, can I thank my dear friend, the Honourable Member for Pontypridd, for her work campaigning on this issue. We met with the families, hugely moved by their story, but also the sense that they felt very let down by previous governments and Lord Chancellors that they had met. And for that reason, I think this move is the right thing to do. And I'm very grateful to her and the member for Birmingham and Yardley for continuing to press this issue behind the scenes.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A high-profile child sex offender was released into my constituency, into a village, by a local school. I was told and informed about this by local residents over 3 months ago. I wrote to the Deputy Prime Minister expressing huge concern, who has refused to meet over this and says it's down to the probation service and it's not worth, they're not going to meet me on this. Why does South Shropshire's children's safety not worth a meeting to discuss this? Because this is a huge issue for my constituents.
Just Secretary.
Can I say, of course I recognise that this will be an issue for his constituents. It is right that these matters are dealt with by the Probation Service, and we're investing a lot of money into the Probation Service over this period to make sure that we reduce caseloads so they can manage cases like this properly. But I will investigate and get back to him as soon as possible.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents experienced horrific abuse at the hands of her ex-husband. Deep fakes were put online on porn sites, and he did it to other women as well. He is now in prison, but when she tried to divorce him, because of bail conditions, she couldn't get access to legal aid for the arbitration service or further legal aid. Would the Minister agree to meet with me to discuss access to legal aid for people who've suffered domestic abuse under these kind of circumstances?
Minister.
I will, of course, agree to meet with her about this case, and she is a tremendous advocate for her constituent. It's important to say that we have ensured that legal aid is available for domestic abuse victims, and we've also changed the evidence thresholds that are required to access that legal aid. But I do want to look into this case, and I look forward to meeting with her about it.
Glover.
Speaker, after being attacked leading to long-term mental and physical health difficulties, a constituent faced a 2.5-year delay and a disappointing offer of compensation from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. It took an appeal and my intervention for her to finally have been offered fair compensation. So what steps will the Minister take to ensure victims of crime receive a good service when applying for criminal injury compensation?
Minister.
Applicants for criminal injury compensation have often endured horrific traumatic experience, and no financial award will ever fully compensate for that. But last year, over 164 million in compensation was paid to victims seriously injured or bereaved by violent crime, and 2/3 of new applications were decided within 12 months. I thank the honourable member for the correspondence that we have had on this matter, and the CICA is working to improve the experience of applicants and to modernise its systems.
Mr. Speaker, 68 is far too late. When will prison officers achieve a fair, just and crucially lower retirement age?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his continued championing of this cause. We regularly meet with the Prison Officers Association. We'll continue to do so. Prison officers do incredible work every day up and down the country. We'll, of course, continue that dialogue.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Now Government, in its 2024 manifesto, made a promise to set up specialist rape courts in every Crown Court location. 2 years on, how many have been set up?
We're 2 years in, and can I assure the honourable gentleman that we will be coming forward with announcements in this area shortly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Sophie Hall-Stalker, was arrested and deported. Post-deportation, there was no monitoring of him at all. The stalking recommenced. He's now back in prison in the UK. This government's progression model means that he will be released early and again will not be subject to active probation supervision. Can my right honourable friend, who promised this would not happen, tell me how on earth Sophie will now be kept safe?
Minister. Well, can I thank my honourable friends? And I met with her and Sophie at the end of last year. When, as a result of that meeting, we made changes to the guidance regarding deportation of offenders. I hadn't been kept updated to what had happened since then, and I will meet with her and Sophie expeditiously.
Gibson.
Would the Minister please join me in thanking and paying tribute to Carol Gould and to Julie Davey from the action group Killed Women, who are constituents of both mine and Anna Sabine, who unfortunately cannot be here for ill health, and paying tribute to the enormous dedication, persistence and courage that they put forward in trying to change and getting through changes in sentencing for domestic abuse.
I'm very grateful to honourable lady, and can I say, as the father of a daughter, can I pay tribute to them, to their doughty campaign over many years to fight for this moment, recognising that there will be women out there now whose lives are saved as a result of this sentence that perpetrators of this terrible, terrible crime can now recognise.
Final question, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister what work the Department is doing to learn from international best practice, like in Estonia, when it comes to using technology in the justice system to help deliver swifter justice for victims?
Very grateful to my honourable friend for the question. I was very pleased in moving to this department to see the work on digital and AI. It's a Whitehall leader. It's why, for example, we're freeing up probation staff to be able to deal with frontline services rather than go through lots of bureaucracy. And the work that's going on in our courts particularly, I'm excited by.
Just before we come to the next part, I have had members coming to me asking when they can see the DIP report. It's odd that we can't get it earlier, and all I would appeal to government is to say, do the right thing by members in this House, let members see that report. I'm told it's market sensitive. If it's such, why has it been all over Sky? Why has it been everywhere, but in this House once again? It is unfair to members of Parliament not getting the report before everybody else. So I put that out there. Hopefully the Secretary of State for Defence will do the right thing and ensure members will get it. Let the front bench change over. We now come to the urgent question. Jim Allister.
To ask the Secretary of State for Business and Trade to make a statement on steel tariffs in relation to Northern Ireland.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I hope you would agree that I've always done my level best to come to the House first with any new announcements. And as I told the House last Thursday in a written and an oral statement, the Government's new steel trade measure comes into force tomorrow, immediately succeeding the expiry of the steel safeguard and ensuring there is no gap in protection for our domestic steel industry. The European Union has also announced today the details of their trade measure, which comes into force tomorrow. Since the announcement of their measure on the 7th of October last year, we have engaged extensively with the EU and agreed an approach that reflects the UK and EU's highly interconnected supply chains. This will provide stability for UK-EU steel trade from the 1st of July, while we continue to work together to strengthen UK-EU steel trade longer term. As you would expect, our engagement has also covered the matter of Northern Ireland in some detail. This ensures that specific arrangements are and will be in place to facilitate the continued smooth movement of steel to Northern Ireland from Great Britain, guaranteeing that movements of steel within the UK market will not pay EU tariffs. These arrangements are aimed at comprehensively protecting the UK internal market. They include the retention of the 7 tariff rate quotas, categories 7, 8, 9, 13, 17, 25A and 28, and in other categories, specific arrangements that will continue to mean that UK origin steel can move tariff-free to Northern Ireland. These arrangements will operate from tomorrow, the 1st of July, and taken together they will serve to protect the operation of the UK internal market and good flows within it. HMRC is now taking steps to confirm these arrangements with industry, including business representative organisations in Northern Ireland. The Government will also continue to provide guidance and support to traders moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland through the Trader Support Service, and we will work closely with the EU to ensure these arrangements operate effectively in practice. Mr. Speaker, we are doing 2 things. First of all, protecting the UK internal market, and secondly, giving UK steel production the protection it needs, so we have a strong UK steel production able to meet at least 50% of the UK's steel needs.
Jim Allister.
Grateful to the Minister for coming to the House. I do have to say there's an inherent absurdity and indeed a constitutional offence in having to come to the sovereign Parliament of the United Kingdom to ask the very question whether or not there will be any tariff arrangements when it comes to moving steel from one part of the United Kingdom to another. Indeed, one recalls that last Thursday the Minister said that he couldn't tell us because he had to wait what the EU decided, underscoring the absurdity that these matters are governed by a foreign jurisdiction, not by ourselves. But I have 3 specific questions for the Minister. Is there, in regard to any class of steel, any quota differential? And if so, in respect of which classes? Secondly, do the EU's new traceability rules, that which they call the melt and pour rules, will those be applied to steel being imported into Northern Ireland? Because if they are, they impose an extra layer of bureaucracy and form filling and obtaining certificates, which are not required when you bring steel into Great Britain. So could we have clarity on that? And thirdly, last Thursday he said that 74% of steel imports to Great Britain will not be covered by the UK trade measures. Can the same be said of Northern Ireland? Is it the same level of exemption, we want to call it that, in respect of Northern Ireland, given the import of the EU governance? I ask those questions because in Northern Ireland we don't make steel, we rely exclusively on importing steel, and therefore the many businesses across in Northern Ireland depend very much. And yet here they are tomorrow facing into a new regime and only hearing about it today.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think the absurdity all lies with him. He seems to be trying to create a difference between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which we are striving at in every way to try and prevent. That's why we've made it absolutely clear that the existing... I'm sorry, if the Honourable Member chunters from his seat, he won't be able to hear what I'm saying, and I might be able to enlighten him. So on the 7 key categories, which are probably most important to Northern Ireland steel, as he says, so category 7, which is steel plate, which is important for shipbuilding and defence. Category 8, stainless hot rolled sheets and strips, which is important for automotives. Category 9, stainless cold rolled sheets and strips, which is also important for automotive. Rebar, Category 13, which is important for construction. Category 17, steel beams, again for construction. Category 25A, large tubes, which is vital for oil and gas, the oil and gas industry. And Category 28, the alloy wire, that were important for fencing. In all of these categories, we've maintained the TRQs. There is no difference. We are very keen to make sure, and we, from the very initial conversations I had with the European Union back in December last year, we have made it absolutely clear that we want to make sure that the UK, that the Great Britain and Northern Ireland are not treated. There is a single market between us. There is no border down the Irish Sea. I would just say also that all of this shows the patent nonsense of having left the European Union. Because the honest, which I know, of course, the people of Northern Ireland agreed with me on this and disagreed with the honourable member. The truth of the matter is we wouldn't have to negotiate with the European Union on these matters if we were still members of the European Union, and there wouldn't be any of these quota issues. The additional truth is that there is a problem about overcapacity of steel around the world. The UK is not the problem for the EU. The EU is not the problem for the UK. And frankly, we should come to a very sensible arrangement, which is what we have mostly managed to do so far, but we will continue to discuss with them. Yes, the 73% of steel imports into the whole of the UK, which includes Northern Ireland, is completely excluded from the measure. And the tariffs only apply above the quota levels. In many categories, we've managed to create quota levels which are above existing trade flow levels. So I don't expect there to be problems in those. But in some areas, we are deliberately trying to make sure that people use British steel, because British steel now only produces 4 million tonnes. And if we don't continue to make steel in this country, we will have a significant problem accrue to us into the future.
James Nash. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for bringing this important new cue on steel tariffs to the Chamber. I welcome the government's ambition on British steel, as has been outlined there. British Gypsum in my constituency has, however, raised some concerns about the short-term impact of tariffs and called for transitional arrangements for steel to avoid unintended consequences on the construction industry. I just wonder whether the Minister would care to pass comment on the idea of a better, stronger transitional arrangement.
Yes, we have introduced transitional arrangements, as I explained to the House last Thursday, to make sure that for the first quarter it's possible where people already have contracts to bring stuff in. As I say, 73% of UK imports of steel will not be covered by, will not be in scope of the measure at all, and can come into the UK easily. What we're simply trying to do is make sure that in the categories of steel that we do produce in the UK, that people turn to British production, because that's the way that we can make sure that we still have a strong steel production in the UK into the future. If he has specific issues in relation to one of the companies in his constituency, I'm very happy for my officials to meet with them.
Dame Harriet Baldwin, Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate the honourable member on securing this urgent question, because we on this side of the House have been clear for a number of weeks how concerned we are about the incoming steel tariffs that will take effect tomorrow. And we've heard from businesses, not just in Northern Ireland, but across the country, that the 50% tariff on steel imports above the quota will do great damage to upstream British manufacturing, to our defence and aerospace sectors and those who construct the nation's infrastructure. Now, we do acknowledge that on Thursday the government have brought forward some changes to the quotas after reflecting on concerns raised by industry. But we've also now heard, Mr Speaker, at the last minute that the EU has cut a significant chunk of the UK's export quota. Businesses have been warning us for months about the damage these proposals could cause, and they're now expected to adapt in a matter of hours, not days. Will the Minister now publish the full impact assessment and communicate properly with the affected sectors? He mentioned a few ways he's going to communicate, but I can't stress the urgency of getting clarity to every business across this country in the upstream steel industry. Have any Northern Ireland businesses specifically lodged applications with the Trade Remedies Authority? And I know the Minister for Industry has kindly let us know that he can't attend orals on Thursday as he will be visiting businesses in Northern Ireland. Is this to do with the serious concerns over steel tariffs? And finally, can we have an update on the negotiations the government is having in this area with the US and with India? Because it does seem that whenever the UK government negotiates on behalf of our steel industry, the UK steel industry seems to lose. So this is all shaping up to be a disaster for steel, and we'd appreciate an update.
Minister.
If I start with the question about the Industry Minister and his visit to Northern Ireland, he's visiting shipbuilding and aerospace companies. It's not specifically in relation to steel at all. If I might just say, in relation to steel generally, her party's record is absolutely shocking, and we will not be going down the route the way they went down. When they came to power in 2010, the UK was producing 12 million tonnes of steel, and when they left power, we were producing 4 million tonnes. That is an existential crisis which happened entirely on their watch, and we need to address it, and we're serious about doing it. And incidentally, countless contracts for major infrastructure projects in the UK, which were awarded by their government and indeed through the MOD, regularly went to steel produced in other countries. So again, I think that I'm not going to follow the route that she has gone down. And in fact, the then Prime Minister even refused to meet with steel workers. That shows the level of concern that the former Conservative government had around steel. We are determined to make sure that we will have a proper steel production industry in the UK, and that does mean that we have to take some tough measures. Now, just in relation to the European Union, and I think she wasn't a leaver, to be fair to her. She was in favour of us remaining in the European Union. But the UK has now secured 1.5 megatons of guaranteed access through country-specific quotas and 1.09 megatons of access through competitive pools, a total access of up to 2.14 megatons through the EU process. UK steel exports to the EU averaged 1.82 megatons between 2022 to 2024, when including products covered by the EU steel measure. So I'm hopeful we did end up with a good result. But the truth of the matter is, as I've said before, and as we have repeatedly said to many others, it would be much more sensible, frankly, if there was an exemption between the UK and the EU in relation to steel measures, so neither of us were facing quotas or tariffs, because, frankly, we're not the problem for each other. And there are specific instances, like Marsiglia, where they are part Italian, part British steel manufacturers, and the danger is that they might be facing tariffs going in both directions. So I just want to correct one other thing that she has repeatedly said on her Twitter account, her X account, which is that there will be a 50% tariff on all steel imports. This is patently untrue, and I really hope she starts correcting the record.
Graham Downey.
Thank you,
much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his work and engagement on this issue over the last few weeks and months. I have been contacted by a range of defence and aerospace companies, both in my constituency and across the UK, including some with a footprint in Northern Ireland, and they are concerned that some of the quotas and exclusions that are allowed do not take into account some of the relevant codes that have been suggested by industry, and they are concerned that could lead to increased costs, project delays and threats to jobs in the future. Can I ask the Minister to give me assurance that he will meet with industry again to discuss those codes they feel are outstanding, and will him or his officials meet with me to discuss this in more detail?
Well, I have met regularly and repeatedly, and I did again yesterday with industry downstream and producers as well, as is my honourable friend, the Minister for Industry, who is sitting by my side. We have strived at every point to make sure that we are only including categories of steel where possible, that are manufactured and are actually manufactured in the UK. That's one of the reasons that we changed the quotas from the original suggestions from March through to what we announced last week, so because of speciality steel not being up and running and therefore able to supply some of the categories that he's talking about. In many areas, the quota is larger than the existing trade levels. I'm very happy for him to meet with my officials if he has specific concerns. Yesterday afternoon, I had a variety of MPs came to meet with me and officials to talk this through, and I'm very happy if he has specific issues for constituency businesses to take that up.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Businesses across Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom are concerned that from tomorrow they will be potentially facing tariffs on steel that they're importing, even if the steel is not manufactured in the United Kingdom in the quantities or the grades that they need it. I know the Industry Minister has requested that we write to him with some specific examples. I did so on behalf of Hewlett Engineering in my constituency on the 19th of June, but Hewlett are concerned that they haven't heard back yet, and July the 1st is coming quickly. I do notice, though, that the Minister mentioned in the answer to the original question that he was working hard to ensure that there is a single market between us and the European Union on this. This is something that Liberal Democrats are really grateful to be able to hear, because we've long argued that this friction is an inevitable result of us leaving the European Union and the single market. So would he be able to help support with the Liberal Democrats campaign to ditch the government's red lines, to have a new bespoke UK-EU customs union joining the single market for our new growth and defence partnership with the EU to help protect British companies and help get Britain growing again?
Yeah.
He's a cheeky one, isn't he, Madam Deputy Speaker? No, I'm not going to sign up to the Lib Dem campaign. But there is a serious point here, which is that it would be much better if the UK and the EU were to have a mutual exemption between each other in relation to quotas and tariffs in this area. I've made the point already, but I'll make it again, which is that we are not the problem for EU steel manufacture, and they are not the problem for us. The problem is about overcapacity, and all the countries in the world that are facing this same issue, frankly, should be joining together and trying to tackle the real issues of overcapacity. Now, I am conscious, there was one question that I was asked about trade remedies authorities. I'm not aware of a particular company in Northern Ireland having approached anybody about whether there's a TRA investigation that should be launched, but certainly there are areas where steel production in the UK could look at whether there's a trade remedy that ought to be sought.
Jonathan Brash.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the world has moved on. We no longer live in a free trade utopia that some might wish. Imposing protections for our steel industry is clearly difficult, but it is also the right thing to do. So would the Minister agree with me that failing to impose these protections would surrender our steel industry, surrender our national defence, and surrender our sovereignty to other nations, and that can never be acceptable?
Well, of course, I agree with my honourable friend. I am, broadly speaking, in favour of free trade, but it has to be free and fair trade. And one of the issues in relation to overcapacity in steel is that it's not a level playing field across the world because of subsidies and anti-competitive practices which make it impossible for UK steel to compete. It is an existential moment, and not least, I mean, I've heard from some Conservatives there's been an argument that we should delay introducing the measure, or we should have lower tariffs or whatever. The truth of the matter is that with the EU already implementing its measure, and the US and Canada, if we were not to implement a similar measure, the danger is that we would be the dumping ground for all the cheap steel in the world, and that would kill absolutely stone dead every single steel mill in the UK. This is not a government that will put up with such a strategy.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister may have met with representatives of the industry, but the question is, has he even listened to their concerns? Because they still say that the problems which were caused by his imposition of tariffs is going to abide with the industry. And he says he's relying on UK producers to be able to produce steel. Tata have said that they won't be able to supply all of the steel which is required. One of the firms he's relying on in Rotherham is an administration. So how can he say with assurance that the supply of steel will be available? But the question for Northern Ireland is this. If Northern Ireland producers have to bring steel from the UK, they first of all have to be sure that the UK quota has not been exceeded. And can he give us an assurance that they will then not have to be concerned about whether or not there's any EU quota left for them, or otherwise they have to pay tax twice?
I'm sorry, but the Honourable Member simply isn't listening to some of the things I've said. He referred to the business in Rotherham, which is specialty steel. Precisely one of the things that we changed, because we listened to people's concerns about this, was the quotas that that would have been met by specialty steel because it's not up and running in the way that we had envisaged. So we have precisely listened and acted on it. And I would just say to him that if he'd been in the chamber on Thursday, he'd have been able to take up the offer I made last Thursday to come and meet with my officials and myself to be able to go through specific details, because I've often found that businesses are being given completely misleading information about how the tariffs will or will not apply to them. And so I'd be very happy if he wants to have, if he has specific businesses that he wants to go through the details of with my officials, then of course we can make that opportunity available to him.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'll take the Minister up on that offer, because I've written to him asking him to meet companies in South Antrim over 2 weeks ago, and I'm still waiting on a response to that meeting as well. He mentioned in his initial answer in regards to TSS and HMRC actually being able to support Northern Ireland companies with advice and guidance. Can he give the House assurance on Northern Ireland companies that they will actually know what they're talking about, because up until now they've been found lacking?
Well, if he wants to write to me about the issue of the way in which HMRC are lacking, or the support is lacking, then I'd be happy to respond to those questions. But as I say, if he'd been in the House last Thursday, he'd have been able to take up the opportunity. Well, I made a statement in the House last Thursday on precisely all of these issues, and he would have then been able to take up the opportunity, as many MPs did yesterday afternoon. It's difficult to arrange precisely that same set of meetings again, but I'm very happy to make sure that officials speak directly to the companies that he's talking about, so that they get the best information that they need.
Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State talks about protecting the steel industry, and we can all agree with that. But steel users in Northern Ireland have been left with confusion, uncertainty and rising costs, with price gouging already happening from suppliers. Whether the Minister likes to admit it or not, Northern Ireland is collateral damage and often caught between UK trade policy and EU diktats, so you can understand the confusion. Despite repeated requests, the Minister has not met with businesses from Northern Ireland. Indeed, I got a commitment in this House a couple of weeks ago, and we're still waiting on that to happen. He needs to urgently allow his officials to meet with and speak directly, not with trade bodies and not even with us, because the industry and these businesses know exactly the answers that they need to get from this government. So will he organise that with immediate effect?
Well, first of all, I note the sort of, her first sentence said, yes, we want to protect steel production, but nobody then wants us to take the measures that we believe are necessary and proportionate to be able to do that. And that is one of the problems here, that of course there are trade-offs. We want to protect steel production in the UK. We believe that that is essential to our national security, to having a strong defence sector into the future, and that's why we're taking these measures. I'm not sure that I will be able to meet with every single business, and we have been very rigorous about pursuing every single meeting that I've committed to. If I've got this wrong, I apologise to her. Again, if she'd been in the chamber on Thursday, she'd have been able to come to the meeting yesterday afternoon when lots of people were able to take up the specific issues relating to their business. Madam Deputy Speaker, if it's all right, I said earlier that 1.5 megatons were being allowed under the EU measure. It's 1.05 megatons.
Alex Easton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Minister's announcement about no EU tariffs for steel coming into Northern Ireland. If we can do that for steel, could we not do that for other commodities coming into Northern Ireland? Would he look at possibly reviewing that to see if there's other items that come into Northern Ireland that maybe don't need to have the same regulations? Thank you.
Minister.
I want to achieve frictionless trade both within the UK internal market, and I'm very determined to protect the UK internal market as much as I possibly can. I also want to achieve frictionless trade with the whole of the European Union because it is our single biggest trading partner, and I think it has been an act of monumental self-harm when we left the European Union that we didn't achieve the frictionless trade that we need.
Campbell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister has been very clear and very open about offering his officials to meet with problem companies that are having difficulties. Will he agree, and he's heard about the number of people who've requested meetings, will he agree to inform each Northern Ireland MP by the end, before the recess, the summer recess, in 14 days' time, that those meetings either have taken place or dates when they will take place, to avoid any possible ambiguity going forward?
If he's not prepared to accept me at my word, then I'm sorry that I'm never going to be able to satisfy him. The truth is, I've been very open about making sure that I came to the House to make a statement last Thursday. We did a written ministerial statement as well, which is obviously available to all members of the House. I made a commitment that any member who wanted to come and meet with me and my officials to come and talk about these things should do so. Sometimes it's other people's diaries, not my, and sometimes it might be my diary, which is the problem. I'm not going to make the specific commitment that he's asking me for, because I think all he's saying is that he doesn't trust me.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers and for his endeavours to find solutions for Northern Ireland. Strangford is home to a robust network of engineering and construction firms who rely on global supply chains to remain competitive and fulfil their live contracts. Because of the government's still new quotas and out-of-quota tariffs, these businesses are facing cost increases of some 18% on active projects and crippling delays. Furthermore, due to the Windsor Framework, our Northern Ireland businesses are uniquely vulnerable to a double whammy of UK tariffs and EU-related red tape. If Strangford's engineering companies fold, the Treasury will lose corporation tax, PAYE contributions, and ultimately have to pay out benefits for staff made redundant. Given the gravity of this situation, and respectively to the Minister, he knows I do things respectively, I always do it that way, will the Minister commit today to exemptions to exclude specific grade sizes and specifications of specialist steel that are not manufactured domestically from these punitive tariffs? Thanks very much.
Minister.
We have always said that what we want to do is provide protection for those categories of steel which are manufactured in the UK and that people could source within the UK. That is our primary aim in all of this measure. And of course, we need to keep that under review. I said last Thursday, as he knows, he was here, that I wanted to review. We will keep this under review from day one, and there'll be a formal review process at the end of the first year. So we need to make sure that that is true. He referred to a double double whammy, I would say that Northern Ireland also suffers from a double benefit, or enjoys rather, a double benefit, because it's both within the UK internal market and in many ways it's also within the European market. And that is a significant advantage to Northern Ireland, which other parts of the UK don't necessarily enjoy. As I say, I'm very happy to meet with any member. I've always held a view that no minister should ever refuse a meeting with another member. I made, as he knows, that offer last Thursday and the offer still stands.
Can I thank the Minister for his responses this afternoon? I will allow a couple of moments for the front benches to swap over.
Madam Deputy Speaker, less than a week ago, I stood at this dispatch box to respond to the report by Donna Ockenden that had exposed devastating failings over more than a decade in Nottingham. As many honourable and right honourable members rightly made clear following my statement, the shocking report into what had happened was far from the first. In 2015, we learnt of the failures at Morecambe Bay. In 2022, we were appalled to hear about what had happened at Shrewsbury and Telford. That same year, the Kirkup inquiry exposed failings in East Kent. There were also other reviews and reports over the years on specific issues related to maternity care. And of course, it is deeply upsetting to recognise that Donna Ockenden is currently planning to undertake further reviews into failings in Leeds and Sussex. Despite all the warnings, the NHS is still failing women, babies and their families on a scale that shames our society. Madam Deputy Speaker, bereaved and harmed families are hearing once again the unbearably painful and distressing consequences of the opportunities that have been missed to put things right. As I stand here today, I think of how they must be feeling. I know from meeting some of the Nottingham families that their unwavering determination is accompanied by a sense of exhaustion, a sense that however many times they have told their stories, however hard they have campaigned for justice and accountability, however strongly they have fought to stop what happened to them from happening to others, hardly anything has changed. That feeling will be shared by mothers and families up and down the country who have suffered so appallingly too. And there will, of course, be deep sadness and distress as they are forced to relive their trauma. The burden that they bear must sit with us all. And that is why my right honourable friend, the member for Ilford, last year decided to announce a national investigation into maternity and neonatal services. That investigation has been carried out by the Noble Baroness Amos, whose report is published today. I would like to put on record my thanks to her and her team for the comprehensive and compassionate way they have carried out their work. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Amos investigation gathered evidence from more than 10,500 people, with Baroness Amos and her team personally meeting more than 450 affected families. They visited 12 NHS trusts and heard from over 9,000 staff through surveys, site visits and one-to-one discussions. Whilst they found that many women experience good and safe care, the report paints a bleak picture of failings at every stage for far too many, from pregnancy, labour and delivery to the first hours, days and weeks after birth. Madam Deputy Speaker, when I read about these systemic failures, I found them not only shocking and upsetting, but also devastatingly familiar, because they are explicitly repeated in review after review. Baroness Amos found that a system is fragmented, overly complex and far too slow to learn. It needs to be radically overhauled. Madam Deputy Speaker, last week I spoke about the need to avoid recommendations from reviews being accepted but then sitting on a shelf gathering dust. Other honourable members agreed with the need to break this cycle. and so that is what we will do. As I told the House last week, the National Maternity and Neonatal Task Force, which I chair, will create a comprehensive action plan by the end of this year. Today's recommendations from Baroness Amos include a proposal for a modern service framework in line with a 10-year health plan to support system change and drive consistent quality care. Those recommendations, along with those national level ones from Donna Ockenden, will feed into our plan. And our plan will make sure that women and babies receive safe, compassionate care no matter where they live. But I do not want people to have to wait for the plan to be completed for us to start making progress. And so I am also taking immediate measures in response to Baroness Amos's investigation, which I will now set out for the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, in considering Baroness Amos's recommendations, the words of a Nottingham mother I met ring loudly in my ears. She said, "Accountability drives action." And so today, I can confirm that in response to Baroness Amos's recommendations, the government will appoint the first ever Maternity and Neonatal Commissioner. The holder of this new statutory role will have responsibility for driving change across all parts of the NHS, including those who provide, regulate and investigate care. They will co-chair the National Task Force along with me. They will hold the system to account, and their role will be to champion the voices of women, babies and families to make sure those voices are heard within government when decisions are made and implemented. Madam Deputy Speaker, last week I announced that the government will roll out Martha's Rule so that women and their families can demand a second opinion if they feel their concerns are being ignored. That meets a key and familiar concern that the Amos investigation pointed to, of women not being listened to as a common factor in maternity failings. And because those concerns are too often battered away before women even arrive at hospital, I can today confirm that we will, this week, publish new national standards for maternity triage so that care is consistent across the NHS and women's concerns are recognised, valued and acted upon at every turn. I expect every trust to prioritise the implementation of these standards, and I have asked NHS England to make sure this is the case and to report progress directly to me. Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the starkest examples of racism, discrimination and inequality happen in maternity and neonatal settings, and this is laid bare in the Amos report. The result is that the risks are notably higher for some women and babies, and as Baroness Amos points out, this is a critical safety issue. Black babies are still more than twice as likely to be stillborn than white babies, and black women are almost 3 times more likely to die during pregnancy or shortly after birth than white women. Whilst tackling inequalities will be a core component of the National Action Plan, we will make a start straight away by rapidly expanding the rollout of the Perinatal Equity and Anti-Discrimination Programme to every trust. All teams will be mandated to receive hands-on support, to hear first-hand experience and to undertake face-to-face learning and development programmes. Every trust would have completed the programme by the end of next year. Madam Deputy Speaker, births that are safe for mothers and babies depend on health services having skilled, trained midwives. As Baroness Amos rightly identified, staff shortages can have a dangerous impact, with examples of some services forced to delay admissions when they get too busy. Since coming to office, we have recruited 2,000 more midwives, and last year our graduate guarantee gave 850 more newly qualified midwives an immediate route into the profession. I can today tell the House that we have created a further 1,000 temporary roles to help newly qualified midwives join the NHS. These new posts will be accompanied by investment too, as I can confirm that we are investing an extra £41 million on top of the £145 million already invested to upgrade outdated and run-down maternity and neonatal facilities. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, alongside these practical measures comes a far more profound challenge that we must face. It is clear from my conversations with affected families, with Donna Ockenden and Baroness Amos, and from the findings of all the reports, that culture is where so much of the responsibility lies. That culture is the most deep-rooted cause of the failures we have seen and the most fundamental thing we must change. We know that when families have been in distress and looking for answers, they were too often ignored, sneered at, disbelieved, blamed and lied to. We know from review after review that wrongdoing is covered up. We know that bullying towards staff who try to sound the alarm is rife. And so we will dismantle toxic dynamics, boost staff morale and support better teamwork between midwives, doctors and other clinicians. We need not only the right policies, procedures and processes to be in place, but also a fundamental reset in the culture of a service that too often puts the desire to protect itself above the duty to protect women and babies. That culture change must come from the top. It is time that trust leaders, executives and senior clinicians pay attention to what is happening on their watch, put professional tribalism aside, lose the bunker mentality when things go wrong, and make sure the safety of women and babies always comes first. Madam Deputy Speaker, this has to be a watershed moment. We must break the cycle of recommendations sitting on a shelf gathering dust. We cannot go on having review after review, and yet women and babies, as well as their fathers and other family members, continue to needlessly suffer injury, death and lasting trauma. We should all feel a responsibility to make sure this opportunity is not squandered. We owe nothing less to every family the NHS has failed in the past, and to every family who will rely on it in the future. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Stuart Andrew.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement, and to Baroness Amos and her team for their compassionate work. Again, as I said last week, I pay tribute to the women and families who gave evidence and to the babies at its heart. Many revisited the most painful moments of their lives after years of fighting to be heard. Their courage places a responsibility on us all. Last week, the House confronted Donna Ockenden's devastating findings in Nottingham. Today, we face the wider national picture. Successive investigations expose the same failures. Women dismissed, deterioration missed, staff silenced, inequalities unchallenged, and leaders failing to learn. The problem is no longer a lack of evidence, it is a failure to act. Donna Ockenden said this morning that sadly so much that is in this report is stuff we already knew, and she did raise concerns about waiting until December. And I do welcome the fact that the Secretary of State has just announced some of the work. It also has to be said that no commissioner alone can fix a system needing action from every level, from the Secretary of State right down to every ward. Donna Ockenden commands enormous respect, and we should all listen to her because she is right. So I do ask, when will the Leeds and Sussex reviews report, and how will ministers act on concerns before they conclude, so that families in those areas can see the change that they need as soon as possible? Families should not have to keep proving the scale of harm. Their testimony must now lead to action. The Birth Trauma Association says the report has overlooked serious injury to women and brain injury to babies. So will the action plan address those harms, and how will families shape and scrutinise it? We welcome the work beginning immediately on triage, discrimination, staffing and urgent estate risks. This is so important that we must get on with that work. But families cannot wait until the end of the year for the wider plan. Those expecting babies now need reassurance about what will change and when. So many must be anxious, and we all need to do what we can to reassure them. The new triage standards will be published this week. By when must every trust meet them, and will the Secretary of State commit to update the House by either oral or written statements on a trust-by-trust progress basis? Will the estate's funding include accommodation for parents close to neonatal units, so families are not separated from their critically ill babies? Now, we do not oppose a statutory maternity and neonatal commissioner, but ministers must be clear about the roles, purpose, powers and accountability, because just one person cannot bring the change that is needed. local leaders have a responsibility too. When will the Commissioner be appointed, and what will they be able to compel trusts, regulators and national bodies to do? And how, as I say, will local leaders be held accountable when care remains unsafe? The additional midwifery posts are welcome, but temporary roles are not a sustainable workforce plan. Donna Ockenden has warned of rota gaps and staff leaving obstetrics and midwifery. The 10-year workforce plan has been promised and delayed and pushed back repeatedly. So when will it finally be published, and will it provide the permanent workforce these recommendations require? With women having babies later and pregnancies becoming more complex, how will those at higher risk receive early specialist care? And again, I agree with the Secretary of State that culture has to change. Listening to women is a clinical duty, not a courtesy. And as I said last week, it is at the core of our safety issues. When concerns are dismissed, warning signs are missed and mothers and babies are put at risk. That duty must apply equally to every woman. A woman's safety must not depend on her ethnicity, first language, disability, income or ability to fight through the system. Again, as I said last week, and here I want to, and both here and I said to him privately, I say to the Secretary of State that I want us to work together constructively. Where the government acts with urgency with this report and its demands, it will have our full support. We all have a duty, and ours is to support these changes. But women and families will not judge today by new structures, promises, or another report. They will judge it by what happens when a woman says something is wrong. Is she heard? Are warning signs acted on? Is senior help available when needed? Are maternity units safely staffed? Can staff speak without fear? And do families receive honesty and compassion when harm occurs? Are fewer mothers and babies coming to harm? And when decisions are taken, will they be fully explained to them? Madam Deputy Speaker, the evidence has been gathered. Families have told their stories. The system has been warned. Now it must change.
I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for not only the questions he raises, but also the tone and approach which he takes. I think we all agreed last week in the statement I gave about Donna Ockenden's report that this is a responsibility shared by everyone in this House to make sure we deliver real change. So I appreciate his approach on that. He asked about the investigations in Leeds and Sussex, which Donna Ockenden will now be turning her attention to over the rest of this year. I think one point I would like to emphasise to him, I think it might be helpful for the House to understand as well, is that in developing a comprehensive action plan through the National Task Force, a framework will be devised so that any recommendations from future reviews can be incorporated into the work of that plan and its implementation. So we don't have a situation where the plan is developed and subsequently future reviews come to conclusions and recommendations without a clear way for those conclusions and recommendations to be integrated with the action plan. I hope that gives him some reassurance over the process. He spoke about a recognition of families who have been harmed and babies and who have grown up into being children and adults living with the harm of failing maternity care even when they survived. I feel very conscious of this, not least because of some of the people I've met who sometimes feel forgotten. They feel their children are forgotten. When we have these conversations, they live with the impact of brain injuries or other issues that arise during birth. They must not be forgotten, and I will make sure that they are included in the process going forward. He asked about the rollout of the new national triage standards, which we published this week. NHS England Chief Executive is meeting with NHS system leaders today to begin the process of making sure those triage standards are rolled out, along with some of the other urgent measures that I've spoken about today. So whilst it is right to take time to get the comprehensive action plan in place by the end of the year, on those measures where we have decided we will progress more quickly, we don't want to waste time by getting on with that. So the NHS England leadership is progressing with that today. He asked about the funding I mentioned, which is for critical safety works in the maternity estate. That is important work for critical safety measures, whilst of course the action plan will set out a more comprehensive approach, not just to the physical infrastructure, but as we've spoken about many times, the culture as well, which is not something you can invest money in the same way you can physical infrastructure, but it is something we need to address, and I think we all agree on that. I sense I had agreement from the House when I raised the importance of addressing cultural problems in maternity services. He asked about the responsibility that might be put on the Commissioner, being as they will be just one person, and I would like to reassure him that my vision of this is for the Commissioner to play a crucial role, but not on their own. You know, they will co-chair with me the National Task Force. They will help to make sure the National Action Plan is implemented. They will hold the system to account. And crucially, they will be a voice for women within the system. So when decisions are being taken by government in response to what I've heard so many times about women being ignored in maternity services, one way of starting to address that is to make sure the Commissioner is a voice for them when decisions are taken. The temporary roles for newly qualified midwives that I mentioned are an immediate step this year to make sure that those newly qualified midwives have a way into the NHS to make a contribution to maternity services. It will then, the funding for that will then be baselined in future years, and it will be for trusts to decide on a trust-by-trust basis how the funding is distributed amongst different roles, because it will vary depending on their needs in local areas. He also spoke about the importance of identifying women who are at higher risk because of different circumstances or problems they may face giving birth. That is exactly what I hope the new triage standards will begin to address, because if the triage standards can identify issues earlier before they escalate and make sure that women have the right support quicker, that can give us an opportunity to avoid extra harm which is avoidable coming to those women by the delay in getting them the right support that they need. And then finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Secretary of State closed his remarks by talking again about culture, the need for the change in culture, and for the support from the opposition, whilst of course robustly challenging us where appropriate, but supporting the aims we're seeking to achieve, and I thank him again for that.
Before I call the next member, members can all sit down. Three things I wish to say. Firstly, that the Secretary of State for Defence will commence his statement at 2:30, so time will be limited. Members may help each other if they ask short questions. Until then, the Macmillan Room in Portcullis House and Committee Room 7 are available as reading rooms for the Defence Investment Plan, and the plan will be made available from the moment that the Secretary of State for Defence stands up when he begins his statement at 2:30. Where's Streeting?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my thanks to Baroness Amos and join the Secretary of State in emphasising the importance of culture change. But culture change won't happen without accountability. And of all of the conversations I had with families who are suffering bereavement or harm for themselves or for their children, the thing that shocked me most is the cover-up culture in the NHS, which continues to persist to this day, and was, I think, exposed once again by Donna Ockenden in her report last week. So given this, and there is a legitimate debate to be had about whether we continue with place-based inquiries or have a statutory public inquiry nationally, I think we have to have that debate. But whatever the answer to that question, it's only worth the paper it's written on if all of those involved in decision-making and care are held to account with a duty of candour. So given that, where is the Hillsborough Law? Because it's important not just for justice for the 97, but also for these families and to prevent future harms. Will that law at least go through this House before the summer recess? Because until it's on the books, people continue to duck answering real questions.
State.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his comments, and let me again, Madam Deputy Speaker, put on record my thanks and tribute to him for having initiated the investigation that Baroness Amos has published today. I know what a committed champion he has been of change when it comes to maternity services in this country, and I think he's absolutely right, and I couldn't agree with him more when he talks about the importance of accountability for culture change. Without that accountability, we will not have culture change across maternity services. The culture of cover-ups will continue. Senior clinicians will feel they can continue to get away with mistakes when they happen. Senior clinicians will feel they can avoid scrutiny when investigations take place, and they will fundamentally continue, in too many cases, to be more concerned with protecting themselves than protecting women and babies. And so I very much agree with him about the importance of that. In terms of what we can do to change that culture, culture is deep-rooted and requires us to take a number of different actions, but I think the duty of candour is the one single most powerful change we can make clearly, loudly, publicly, because the message it will send to senior clinicians thinking about what to do in the future if they make a mistake or if they are tempted to cover up things that go wrong in the future is that one day they will be held to account, and there is no avoiding that. Because with a duty and candour in place, there will no longer be an opportunity for clinicians, senior clinicians in particular, to refuse to engage in that process, to refuse to be held to account, be part of the justice process. People will face up to 2 years in prison if they refuse to cooperate, so it is a serious measure, and I very much agree with him on the importance of making sure the Hillsborough law gets on the statute books so that this duty of candour can apply to future maternity investigations.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I also add my thanks to the Secretary of State and to Baroness Amos and her team and the families that have relived the pain of their experience in order to bring about this report today. But the Amos report tells us little that we didn't already know. Indeed, it confirms our worst fears. Maternity services in England are fundamentally broken, with the cost of political neglect being paid in trauma, injury and lost lives. Figures revealed by the Liberal Democrats in the last week show that the first quarter of 2026 saw the worst rate ever recorded for maternity injuries. In fact, while the number of reviews into NHS maternity services has steadily ticked up, we've also seen rising maternal mortality rates. Now, 4 years ago, I spoke in this chamber in response to the findings of the Shrewsbury and Telford review, which were devastating for my own community. And last week, I stood here really distressed, actually, as we heard further traumatic reports from the Nottingham review. But anger isn't enough. The government must meet this moment now and implement Baroness Amos's recommendations in full and without delay, or the families simply won't forgive them. To do this, we need genuine accountability through the NHS and the Department of Health and Social Care, accompanied with the investment needed to make Britain the safest country in the world to have a baby. Now, we welcome the government's commitment to a National Maternity Commissioner, a long-standing Liberal Democrat campaign, and also the other urgent and immediate actions that the Secretary of State has outlined in the last week. They are all urgent and signs of taking this seriously. But we need to recognise that a Commissioner alone cannot fix the broken system. So I urge the Secretary of State to work with us and look at our maternity rescue package for inspiration for his action plan. It has a great degree of overlap with Baroness Amos's recommendations. Our package would ensure one-to-one midwifery care for every woman in labour, additional senior midwives, an obstetrician on every ward, and mandatory updated annual training. So will the government commit here and now to implementing all of those recommendations and working with us to deliver the change we need?
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments, and I think she puts it very well when she talks about Baroness Amos's investigation as confirming our worst fears. I think I was shocked but not surprised, sadly, to read the investigation report. It was devastatingly familiar to read what it set out as being. The recommendations from Baroness Amos's report will now become part of the work of the task force, which I chair, to produce the comprehensive action plan by the end of this year. And my intention is that the task force will take all of the national recommendations from Baroness Amos's report, as well as the national level recommendations from Donna Ockenden's report last week and recommendations from many other investigations and reports and make sure that the action plan it produces comprehensively addresses all of the issues it raised. Because I think we would all agree that there isn't 1, 2, 3, a small number of actions we need to take. This has to be a comprehensive plan to truly transform the service.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
The Secretary of State will know that for very many women, they are never more vulnerable than in childbirth. And it's not just the vulnerability, but the horror of what women and their babies are exposed to in childbirth. And we see inquiry after inquiry, and nothing seems to improve. And very many of those women who are suffering in childbirth are black women and their babies. And the Secretary of State himself said to me, black babies are still more than twice as likely to be stillborn than white babies, and black women are almost 3 times more likely to die during pregnancy or shortly after birth than white women. The whole House, wants to see progress made on this issue, but it isn't enough to have another inquiry. It isn't enough to have another report. What black women and their babies want is equity of treatment and fewer black women and their babies die.
Secretary of State.
I thank my right honourable friend for her comments, and I agree with her about how shocking the failures in maternity services are, particularly because these failings and the failure to listen to women happens at a point at which they are at their most vulnerable. It's at that moment when they are let down, when they need the NHS the most, is when the NHS fails them. And that is one aspect of this that makes it truly devastating. She also rightly highlights the inequalities and the impact on black women and their babies, black women and their babies being at more risk than white women and their babies, and the inequality that exposes. As I mentioned during my earlier statement, we will begin by making sure the perinatal equity and anti-discrimination programme is extended to all trusts by the end of next year. That is an immediate measure we're taking rather than the sum of all measures we'll take on this front. And the inequality, racism, discrimination will be a central part of the action plan that the task force develops.
Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I strongly agree with the former Secretary of State's comments about the need for getting the culture right with accountability? When I was Secretary of State, we passed the duty of candour regulations. They were supposed to make it, they do make it a criminal offence for trusts not to tell the truth to families when a tragedy has happened. Yet to this day, trust lawyers advise doctors, nurses and midwives not to be open about what's happened when there is the prospect of legal action further down the line. So will the Secretary of State, who I know is very committed to this, but will he agree that in the Hillsborough law we will clear up this anomaly so that it is just not possible for trusts not to tell the truth, and trust lawyers always advise their own doctors, nurses and midwives they must tell families exactly what happened?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his comments and again agree with him and my right honourable friend from Milford North about the importance of accountability in terms of changing culture. I think when he made a contribution to the statement last week about Donna Ockenden's report, he made a comment around how this is about having accountability structures embedded throughout the system because this is not something the top of the NHS Chief Executive or the Secretary of State or ministerial team can control throughout the NHS, the structure has to be embedded to make sure accountability happens at every level, which is something I very much took to heart and agree with in terms of what we need to do next. On his specific point about the Hillsborough law and how that will address the issue that he refers to about legal departments advising effectively a cover-up of what has happened, I will look into that because that does sound concerning, and I will look into that as part of our work to make sure this works properly. The expectation with the duty of candour, which will come in under the Hillsborough law, is to make sure that we can never again have a situation, as happened in Nottingham, and I couldn't quite believe it, if I'm honest, when I heard it, about how many senior clinicians simply refused to take part. You know, it is outrageous. It is unacceptable that so many senior clinicians were able to and felt able to just say no. You know, that is not accountability if it's optional. And that's what we need to change. And I'll look into the point he raised specifically.
Andy McNair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I, of course, usually welcome the report and join in a thanks to all that have made it possible, but most fundamentally the families who shared their experiences, showed extraordinary courage through the whole process. Many of those stories were shared with us in the all-party group for baby loss. I'd like to assure those families that we will carry on listening to them and carry on being a voice for them through this process. There are many powerful recommendations in the report. I welcome the delivery plan and the Maternity Commissioner, but fundamentally, the government must retain responsibility for the ultimate outcomes. So following the exploration of the National Maternity Safety Ambitions in 2025, will Secretary of State now recommit to meaningful targets to reduce stillbirths and neonatal deaths and reduce a target to finally fully eliminate inequalities in baby loss?
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend, and he draws an important point out here, which is that in developing the National Action Plan that I referred to earlier, a key part of developing it is to make sure we have the right metrics, the right mechanisms for monitoring its implementation, and the right structures in place for making sure it's implemented across all trusts. And in working with the members of the task force, I will make sure that those accountability mechanisms about the delivery of the plan itself are in place, because I've spoken many times today about the importance of recommendations not sitting on shelves. We need to make sure we have the structures in place such that the actions in the National Action Plan are implemented, we can see they're being implemented, and we can give people the confidence that that is the case.
Chair of the Health Select Committee, Leila Moran.
I too would like to put on the record my thanks to Baroness Amos, her team, but most especially the families who so bravely gave evidence that has formed this report today. Further to the conversation that we are having about accountability, he will have noticed that there are some families who are concerned about the role of the Commissioner. Their concern is that the Commissioner is just one person and that there's too much for them to do. Can he just make clear the buck stops with him, doesn't it? And indeed the PM, and that he won't let go of this. The Commissioner will report every 6 months to the Health and Social Care Select Committee. We welcome that, and once a year to Parliament. But further to that, would he personally commit that the Secretary of State will come to the House once a year and seek permission from the Speaker so that they can be held personally accountable for the progress too?
State.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and in describing the role of the Commissioner, I think she is right to emphasise that it cannot all be on one person. The Commissioner, I think, is a vital role, and it being on a statutory basis will give that position real weight within the system to hold the system to account and help the government to ensure the implementation of the comprehensive National Action Plan. But she is right to say that ultimately this is something for which accountability has to include the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister, because it is a duty that we all hold as MPs, we hold as a government, I hold as a Secretary of State, and the Prime Minister ultimately will hold that responsibility too. So it's not in any sense intended to be a passing of responsibility to a Commissioner. The Commissioner role is being established to support the effectiveness of the work we're seeking to do as a government to implement the National Action Plan, but crucially, when accountable politicians are taking decisions, the Commissioner will be a voice for women in the system, because I have heard so many times about, not just in relation to maternity services, also in terms of other parts of healthcare, women's voices not being heard, but particularly in terms of maternity services, particularly in terms of when things go wrong and women have concerns of maternity services, their voices are not heard. And so this Commissioner will be a way of making sure those voices are right at the very heart of decision making.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister and the Secretary of State for making this statement this afternoon. I also want to pay tribute to the Noble Baroness Amos for the work and care and dedication they've taken in this report, and to the many women who came forward with their testimonies. And I think back to just over 9 years ago, when I was giving birth to my second son, and the concerns that I raised, and to think that 9 years on, women are still being dismissed, women are still not being listened to, women are still being silenced when they raise those valid concerns. But I also do want to pay a tribute to the hard-working midwifery team at St Thomas's Hospital across the river, who continue to care for many women. And to highlight the Southwark Maternity Commission led by Councillor Evelyn Okoto, and the work of organisations like 5 Times More. Many organisations that continue to expose some of the issues faced by black and minority ethnic women. We also have to highlight the concerns of black minority ethnic staff, who are in some cases told that they do not want to be served and they do not want to be helped. Can the Secretary of State outline when this real action plan will come through in terms of the accountability that many others have raised, in terms of making sure that the doctors and clinicians do actually listen to these women?
I thank my honourable friend, and the action plan, which will be developed through the task force that I chair and that the Commissioner will co-chair when that position is established, will publish its national action plan by the end of this year. That will take on all of the or consideration of all of the recommendations from Baroness Amos's report, as well as John Ockenden's reports. But I think there's also a point that my honourable friend makes, which I think is worth drawing attention to, which is the many midwives and others working in maternity services who do a really important job, work really hard to provide excellent care to women. That's not to diminish the scale of the failings, but it's to give the right perspective on all those midwives who do a really important job and work hard to care for women and their babies. And I think it's evidenced by the fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in Baroness Amos's investigation, 9,000 members of staff came forward to give evidence. That's because they're concerned. That's because they want to see change as well. So whilst this is, of course, about women and their babies and their families primarily, staff also have a really important voice in this, and we need to improve the system so that they can make their contribution as well.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This week last year, I had multiple pulmonary emboli only a few weeks after giving birth, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Laura Stevens, who saved my life and then was punished for having ordering the test that found that I'd had multiple pulmonary embolisms. Blood clots are the #1 cause of pregnancy and postnatal births, and yet there is not a word about the risk of them in any pregnancy pack given out in this country. The National Action Plan will fail if it does not tackle blood clots as the #1 cause of maternal deaths. So will the Health Secretary kindly meet with me, work with me, and make sure together we can save lives?
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for sharing her experience and for raising the importance of this issue from her experience, but also for the benefit of maternity services more widely. I'm very happy for myself or ministerial team to meet with her to discuss this in detail, because it's very important that that is part of the National Action Plan and our wider response.
Joan Croft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I very much welcome the report and the work done by Baroness Amos to highlight the failings across our maternity system. Yeah. It is pure and utter medical misogyny that has led us here. The value that we place on the lives of women and the experiences of women has been brought to the fore, and it is very, very low. I think that the through line throughout the entire report, and the ones we've seen previously, are that women's voices weren't heard, their pain wasn't believed, their experiences were completely and utterly disregarded, and this must change. In terms of specifics, I would like to add my voice as well to those colleagues who are calling for measures to address the disparity in treatment between black and ethnic minority women. And I would call that training, proper training and continuous professional development is put in place to make sure that black women do not have the kind of experiences that we have seen to date. And I would also plead with the Secretary of State to make sure that there are real accountability measures in anything put forward. It cannot be right that I have a maternity unit that is inadequate and has always been inadequate or requires improvement, but yet I have not seen a senior member of staff ever pulled over the coals for this happening. That has to change.
I thank my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right to call this for what it is in many cases, which is misogyny in maternity services, and of course to draw attention to the different impact on different mothers, the racial and ethnic inequality that there is within the system. The anti-discrimination programme I mentioned, which is being rolled out over the next year and a half, that will be an important first step, but that cannot be the sum total of what we do to address discrimination and inequality. That will be a focus of the National Task Force, as will, to repeat a point many members have rightly made today, accountability, because it's only by embedding that accountability throughout the system that we can be truly confident of change.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, like others, well, of course, welcome this report. The Secretary of State referred to Dr. Bill Kirkup, who, of course, resigned from the Amos review as advisor because he felt that the review was skirting around certain birthing ideologies and caesarean targets. He also said in his statement that staff shortages can have a dangerous impact, and indeed they can. And although he and Baroness Amos refer to culture, a lot of that culture is to do with budgetary and other pressures which result in members of staff on the front line being discouraged and belittled from blowing the whistle about unsafe staffing levels on the front line. So will the Secretary of State look again at the report and consider for the first time actually introducing mandatory safe staffing on the front line for these services?
I thank the honourable gentleman. He raises important points around staffing and, of course, training to make sure that the right staff, the right levels of training, the right structures are in place. I know from having seen Baroness Amos's report and indeed from the recommendations from Donna Ockenden's report last week that those questions will be central to the work of the task force in developing the National Action Plan, because whilst there is not, as I've said a few times today, simply one or two levers we need to pull or actions we need to take to make change, those are clearly central to what we need to be doing.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Mr. Speaker, just echoing what my colleague from the Select Committee said, Baroness Amos pointed to workforce challenges and their impact on care and safety. She noted that 67% of midwives reported burnout. Meanwhile, the GMC survey found that 63% of Obs and Ghani trainees had a high or very high workload. That's higher than the 42% average. The workforce plan has to address these problems, will it?
State.
I thank my honourable friend, and his question around staffing and around making sure that we have not only the right levels of staffing, but the right responsibilities of different people in the service to ensure that we don't have individual members of staff suffering from burnout and workloads which they can't cope with, are critical questions which the task force will consider as part of its development of the National Action Plan.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Last Wednesday and again today, the Secretary of State expressed his shock at the number of senior clinicians who refused to take part in the Nottingham Review. Can I repeat a suggestion I made then, which is that those clinicians should be named publicly? This is a step he could take straight away. So if a parliamentary question for written answer is put down, asking him to name those clinicians, will he answer it? I can't think of a better or more justifiable use for parliamentary privilege.
Secretary of State.
I thank the right honourable gentleman. I will take away his suggestion and think on it because it is important, it's critical that we have accountability. And I find, as I said earlier, in response to other questions, I find the decision by senior clinicians not to take part in the Nottingham inquiry utterly unacceptable, utterly incomprehensible on a personal level, and something we must make sure never happens again.
Dr. Ben Coleman.
Oh, I'm not a doctor, but thank you so much. maybe from the University of Life, who knows? Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to pay tribute both to Baroness Amos for this excellent report and also to my honourable friend, the member for Ilford North, for commissioning it in the first place. I think it's a remarkable piece of work, and following on Ockenden and following on the report that my own Health Select Committee, the chair of which sits opposite, has done into black maternal health, we see again and again the same problems: misogyny, racism, lack of accountability. And I'm delighted, therefore, that we are going to have this plan developed in 6 months through the task force, but also that we're having a maternity commissioner. And I know that my constituent, Louise Thompson, who has been campaigning hard for this position to be created, will be delighted. But I would also think that, like me, she will have a question about timing. Will it be possible for the Commissioner, who will be introduced on a statutory basis, to be brought in quickly enough for this person to have a full role in shaping, in creating the plan that's going to be before us in 6 months, or not? And if not, why not?
Cheers, Date.
I thank my honourable friend, and he asks about the timing and the process for establishing a Commissioner. The first step is that within the next 2 weeks, I'll be meeting with members of the task force to agree the scope and detailed role for the Commissioner, because I want that scope and role to be agreed with members of the task force, given they're going to be developing the National Action Plan. We then need to get the Commissioner on a statutory basis. I want to get on a statutory basis as quickly as possible. I'm keen to look for options through the Health Bill, but that will obviously be subject to discussions with the parliamentary usual channels about that. Once that's in place, we can then appoint the Commissioner as quickly as possible. But I think it's worth me emphasising that the role of the Commissioner will be in implementing the National Action Plan. So the work on developing the National Action Plan will begin immediately. The work on establishing the Commissioner will also begin immediately. Whenever the Commissioner is appointed, they will have a role in implementing the National Action Plan, because it's not simply about developing a national plan, it's about making sure it gets implemented, and that we hold trusts and other organisations across the system to account in making that implementation happen.
Rosie Duffield.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our APPG on birth trauma report in 2024, which was the first in Parliament, we heard from over 1,300 women and families, and it was entitled Listen to Mums. And I'm glad that our years of calls for an independent maternity commissioner are finally going to be implemented. Bill Kirkup's headline finding in his 2023 review of East Kent was also listen to women. The Health Secretary has again repeated the importance of listening to women, women who are the mothers, the midwives, the experts, and even the MPs here working for years on this issue. Why does he think we haven't been listened to, or often not even invited to be in the room? And how will he work to provably change that in his time in the department?
Well, I thank the honourable lady, and she's, of course, absolutely right to draw attention further to the issue of women being ignored in health services generally, but specifically in terms of maternity services. And I think that this goes back to the question of culture. I think that the culture which is in maternity services, it's a devastating conclusion to come to, but seeing that culture is there of misogyny, of women being ignored, of women's concerns not being listened to and acted upon, that is the culture that we need to change. And one of the first actions we can take to change that culture is accountability, is making sure that accountability through the duty of candour that we've discussed and through other actions we can take to enhance accountability throughout the system is a critical first step in making sure that we change that culture.
Michelle Welsh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome Baroness Valerie Amos's review, and I wish to thank her and her team for their commitment to this vital work. But once again, this review confronts us with a very uncomfortable truth, but a very real truth, a reality, that this inquiry, the inquiry into Donna Rockenden, did not come about because of a system, it did not come about because of NHS England or a regulatory authority. It came about because families have to keep on speaking up and over over again what is one of the most horrific and traumatic things ever to happen. All whilst there was a culture within of mutual protection and a code of silence, where some staff have shielded each other from consequences. I welcome the recommendation on the National Maternity and Neonatal Commissioner, a strong independent voice with power to challenge, but we know that one appointment alone will not solve these problems. We need fundamental reform of the wider system of oversight and accountability. Regulators and NHS bodies and inspection regimes must change. Reviews do not save life, action does. We need strong leadership, big bold decision making and a determination to implement change rather than simply recommend it.
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and may I again put on record my thanks to her for supporting families in their fight for justice and accountability. She's absolutely right to say it is families who have driven this. It's families who have had a determination and a persistence, a stamina, which is quite hard to imagine when people are dealing with such unimaginable pain that lasts their whole life. But that is what families have done, and that is why I feel it is our responsibility to make sure they don't have to drive that alone, that we as MPs, as government ministers, as Secretary of State for Health, support families in that drive for accountability, for justice and for change. My honourable friend is absolutely right as well. This must be about a fundamental reform, and that must include all parts of the system, including the regulators, who far too often have let women down.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, how much will the Secretary of State keep an open mind as to whether it is right to abolish the Health Services Safety Investigation Body, which was specifically designed to provide for a duty of candour? Clinicians would be obliged to give evidence to HSIB. They could not refuse, and there are criminal penalties if they do so. The duty of candour, as conceived in the Hillsborough law, and as we already have established, does not work. And I suspect there will be no improvement unless HSIB is allowed to carry out completely independent investigations, which have also proved they can carry public confidence and of patients and of clinicians. Will he keep an open mind about keeping HSIB?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. I know this is an issue that he feels strongly about, and he's raised with me before. My colleague, the Minister of State for Health, who is taking the NHS modernisation bill through Parliament, is leading on the changes we're seeking to make around HSIB and the CQC. I hear what he's saying, but my honourable friend has set out clearly the government's rationale for the changes we're seeking to achieve and what that will accomplish.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also want to pay tribute to Baroness Amos for this report that she has published. But the scale, this report really lays bare the scale of racism and discrimination within maternity and neonatal care. This is not a surprise to anyone because this is an issue that I and many other honourable members in this place have been raising for years. So I do welcome the recommendation to root out racism and discrimination within those services. But more broadly, we all know that there are structural inequalities that exist across the NHS, whether we like it or not, and we do need to hold those responsible accountable. So can the Secretary of State share a little bit more about how he intends to be held accountable in this place, but also to hold those senior clinicians accountable for their actions, because we need to root out racism and discrimination.
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and she's right to again draw attention to the importance of accountability in making maternity services operate as they should, and that applies to the racism, the discrimination, the inequality that she described as being so important that we tackle. Ultimately, it is right that I, as Secretary of State, that all ministers in the government are held to account by Parliament about us, our actions in this space. But we also need to make sure that that accountability is spread throughout the system, which is why our decision to extend the anti-discrimination programme across all trusts by the end of 2027 will be an important first step in making sure that all trusts are held accountable for tackling discrimination and racism where it exists. But more broadly, it will be part of the National Action Plan that we'll publish by the end of the year, which will explain exactly how we will embed that accountability in terms of racism and discrimination right throughout the system.
Ms Jarvis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Recommendation 3 in the report calls for improvements in how the system responds when something goes wrong, including providing a sincere apology. Will the Minister apologise now to my constituents Charlotte and James, who lost their baby Nora at Winchester Hospital, and the thousands of families who have suffered the loss of a baby due to systemic failures in NHS maternity care?
Secretary of State.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments, and I'm incredibly sorry to hear about her constituents, Charlotte and James, and their baby Nora. I met some of the families in Nottingham 2 weeks ago, and the depth of pain was, and I quote a word that someone in the room said to me, numbing, because it was so heavy to hear and to understand. What made me feel even more numb was to recognise that that pain, that deep pain, is replicated so many times. It's the breadth of the pain as well. It's the sheer scale of it. And I think hearing about her constituents, Charlotte, James, and their baby Nora, is just one more example of where families have been let down by NHS maternity services. And that is why this is a responsibility that weighs heavy on all of us and weighs heavy on me as Secretary of State to do something about.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement and the work of Baroness Amos on this vital report. Disabled women are 44% more likely to suffer a stillbirth than non-disabled women. Drawing on the evidence session I chaired with our Maternable campaign of disabled mothers, Baroness Amos' report highlights the devastating discrimination and structural barriers causing such inequalities for disabled women, from devastating assumptions that we are not sexually active or capable of parenting, to the lack of accessible maternity spaces and medical equipment, as well as insufficient access to BSL interpreters. It sets out the appalling lack of coordination and continuity of care across maternity pathways and services for disabled mothers. Will the Secretary of State meet with me to ensure disabled women's voices are central to the Government's task force and in implementing the report's recommendation by overcoming the inequalities we face in our maternity care?
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend, and she's an incredibly powerful advocate for the discrimination that disabled mothers face within the health service, but particularly maternity services. She talks about both the discrimination and the barriers to accessing care, and I think she's right to point to them being wide and systemic, and this is something which needs to be addressed as part of the comprehensive action plan. I'd be very happy for myself or a member of my ministerial team to meet with her to discuss this in more detail.
Ellie Chance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the investigation by Baroness Amos, which has shone a light on the fact that these failings in maternity services are not isolated to one hospital or another, but across the piece. The Secretary of State identifies rightly that culture is at the centre of this, and that we must listen to the voices of women, and we must listen to the voices of whistleblowers. And that doesn't just apply to maternity services, it applies across the NHS and indeed in public life more widely. He's spoken about accountability, starting from the top, but I noticed he swerved the question earlier about whether he would come back to this House to report on progress against the goals he has set himself. It is shocking and shameful that black women are 3 times more likely to die than white women in maternity. Will he commit to coming back to the Chamber and to reporting and holding himself to account to change those racial disparities and to ensure true equity in healthcare?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and I absolutely agree that I, as Secretary of State, must be held to account, and that is the role of this House. I will take that away and work out the best way of making sure that happens on a basis that people can understand and know what timetable it happens to, because I'd like to make sure that I'm held to account for the delivery of the whole action plan and what the right way of doing that is. But let me take that away and come back to her with an update.
Bel Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also want to put on record my thanks to Baroness Amos and her team and the families who relived their pain so that this report could exist. They are the real heroes here. And I welcome the report and the new neonatal and maternity commissioner that's been announced. It's vital, I believe, that the report recognise structural racism, but this will mean nothing unless it becomes national standards that tackle inequality and deliver high quality care for every mother and their baby. The report, I note, stops short at recommending a target to bring to an end racial disparities in maternity care, and perhaps that's because the commitment was ours to keep in our manifesto. In April, the Minister for Secondary Care told this House that the target to end racial disparities in maternity outcomes would be informed by these recommendations. They are published now. Will the Secretary of State finally give us a timetable to deliver it? I remind him that black women are 3 times more likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth. Their babies are twice as likely to be stillborn. These are not statistics. They are mothers and children who are still dying. We promised a target at the last election. Without one, we cannot measure progress and we cannot end this disparity.
State.
I thank my honourable friend, and she is right to draw attention to the disparity in what black women and their babies experience in the health service and the extra risks that they face in maternity services in particular. The task force will produce a comprehensive action plan by the end of the year, and that will include with it, I anticipate it will include with it metrics about delivery and ways of monitoring progress. So I'll make sure that her comments in that regard are fed into the work that it carries out.
Bobby Dean.
Deputy Speaker. To deliver on this review's recommendation in full is going to require serious capital investment. Just last week we heard about the hospital in my constituency in St Helier considering closing its maternity unit altogether due to potentially unsafe pipework. So will the government commit to reviewing the phasing of the new hospitals programme, or at the very least providing the funds required to keep those buildings safe and open until the delivery of a new building?
I thank the honourable gentleman. In terms of capital investment, as I set out in my statement earlier, we've announced an extra £41 million specifically to address critical safety issues in maternity and neonatal services. That funding is on top of the funding already in place, but will help address those critical safety issues. The wider action plan will set out our overall approach, and whilst of course, funding will be a consideration for what the government does. I would again draw attention to the importance of deep-rooted issues like culture, which must be addressed as part of the plan.
Zubair Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by commending my right honourable friend for the thoughtful and considered way he has approached this investigation and indeed other matters during his time in office. The Secretary of State rightly spoke about culture. Others have spoken about ideology. I wonder if he agrees with me that the only ideology that matters as we try to change this culture should be rooted in science and evidence. Yeah. And can I ask him to consider, therefore, that the maternity women should be the first in line as the beneficiaries of that science and evidence, whether it's the single patient record, to have access to their own maternity care records, so that data can make sure that poor care has nowhere to hide. We can finally get AI-enabled scanners and replace 19th century equipment that's currently being used to listen to babies' heartbeats. And finally, can I ask him to share formally the findings of this report with the Scottish Government, because much of those findings will resonate in terms of training, culture, clinical pathways, and unfortunately the Scottish Government has been less than forthcoming with its own investigations in this matter.
State.
I thank my honourable friend for his comments and his emphasis on the need for us to tackle the deep-rooted cultural problems in maternity services. He talks about how the only ideology that we should follow should be based on science and evidence. I agree with him very much about the importance of science and evidence and of making sure that women are aware of the risks and benefits of different options available to them to make informed choices. I would add to what he says is in that the only ideology I would, or the ideology I would be very comfortable to sign up to is one that says that women must be listened to. I think that is a principle that I think we can all agree on, and we should make sure that is embedded in our maternity services. He mentions as well investment in technology, including the single patient record. And I think there is a real benefit here, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the single patient record to make a difference, particularly in maternity services. The single patient record will be enabled by the NHS Modernisation Bill currently going through Parliament, and I want to make sure it is available to maternity services as quickly as possible. And of course, I'm very happy to share a copy of the report with the Scottish Government.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State's announcement today that there will be 1,000 extra midwives is very welcome, even if it is a temporary bit of funding. But this is a review into both maternity and neonatal services. In Baroness Amos's review of Sussex, one thing she noted was that in the 12 months ending October 2025 at the Royal Sussex County Hospital in Brighton, only 50.1% of shifts were staffed according to the British Association of Perinatal Medicine guidelines, 50%. So what provision is the Secretary of State making to ensure that neonatal staffing is safe?
State.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments and for welcoming the additional 1,000 positions to make sure that newly qualified midwives can find a way to contribute towards the NHS. She again raises the issue which other members have rightly raised today about staffing, about training as well, and the questions about making sure we've got the right staffing in place with the right training to support them will be something the task force will consider ahead of the publication of the National Action Plan at the end of the year.
Nearly. Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. That this report is welcome makes its existence no less tragic. Far too many mothers and babies already failed. Mothers like my constituent Amy, who just late last year was turned away repeatedly despite reporting reduced movements. Her baby Seren was born stillborn. The NHS spends almost as much on clinical negligence payouts than it does on maternity care itself. So can the Secretary of State update on progress in following the Lock review into clinical negligence, because it's about time we started investing in better care rather than paying out for failure.
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend, and I was incredibly sorry to hear about her constituent Amy, who was turned away repeatedly from services despite asking for their help. And I think that's a story that we've heard far too many times as part of the work that Baroness Amos, Donna Ockenden have done, and the stories we all hear from our constituents. She's also right to point out the amount of money that goes on clinical negligence rather than making sure the services are better in the first place to avoid the need for that. I've met with David Locke KC to discuss his ongoing work on that, and I'll be working with him closely on that in the months ahead.
Adam Dance.
Yeovil Hospital was included as part of this review after its temporary closure last year. Since then, families, frontline staff and I have been repeatedly raising concerns with government and NHS leaders about working cultures, bullying and staffing levels and support. Today's review backs that up. After months of feeling our concerns have not been properly acted on. So, can the Secretary of State in detail what the government is doing on improving staffing levels in rural maternity units and addressing working cultures, leadership, accountability and whistleblowing?
I thank the honourable gentleman, and he's right to draw attention to the importance and the impact that bullying, that poor working culture can have on maternity services. That focus on culture and on what we can do to change that culture is a key part of the National Action Plan, which the task force will develop. We want to make sure that staffing levels are not only correct and that staff have the right training, but also that different members of staff work together across different disciplines and roles, because that is one way to make sure that the service improves.
Ian Byrne.
Secretary of State, now you, like countless other ministers over the years, have stood at that dispatch box, outlined and apologised for yet another state cover-up. Can we agree enough really is enough? Will you personally intervene and beg the Prime Minister to pass the Hillsborough in full, which has been promised to us on numerous occasions before summer recess, and end this culture of cover-ups?
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's right to point to the importance of the Hillsborough Law, because the Hillsborough Law is one that not only will enable greater accountability and justice across society, but also in terms of future maternity investigations. I see that as being crucial, and that's why one of the commitments I made last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, following Donna Ockenden's report, was to apply the duty of candour, which the Hillsborough Law will enable, to all future maternity investigations, so that never again can we have a situation where senior clinical leaders choose not to participate and choose to avoid accountability.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker, a retired paediatrician and constituent told me recently that after giving 50 years service to the children of the NHS, she was devastated by the treatment of mothers and babies, and indeed loyal staff whose concerns are routinely ignored, as when Yeovil Specialist Baby Unit was recently closed without notice. So while I welcome the Government's commitment to a new maternity commissioner, will the Secretary of State set out how the commissioner will intervene in a trust like Somerset, rather than simply reporting on failures after harm has been caused?
Secretary of State.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and in the coming 2 weeks I will be meeting with the National Task Force, which I chair, to set out and establish the scope and role of the new National Maternity Commissioner. I want to make sure that the scope and role of that Commissioner is agreed with the Task Force. The Task Force will produce the action plan which the Commissioner will help to implement, so I want to ensure this is all done with the same principles in mind. I think she also mentioned an important point around not only mothers being ignored, which they are far too often, but also staff being ignored. It's a point that a few members have made today, and I think bears repeating. We know that 9,000 staff contributed towards Baroness Amos's report, which underlines the fact that they want a better maternity service as well.
Final question, Annalise Stodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The lack of national maternity triage standards has been of huge concern to some of my constituents, including through bitter and heartbreaking experience. He said that NHS England would be responsible for rolling out and monitoring these standards. So can I ask whether that responsibility will pass into his department by April of next year, and how will he really ensure that these standards are genuinely implemented at every trust? Thank you.
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for her question, and when talking about national triage standards, she's absolutely right to point to the impact they can make by ensuring that where there are problems, they are seen earlier, that women who need support can get that support earlier to prevent greater harm from occurring wherever possible by having that support at the right time. The national triage standards are being set out by NHS England at the moment, because the NHS England organisation still exists. The Chief Executive is meeting with trusts today to begin that work of rolling out the triage standards across all the different trusts. When NHS England becomes part of the Department for Health and Social Care, we will obviously continue to monitor that, and that will be something which the Task Force will also consider as part of its National Action Plan.
That is the end of the statement on national maternity and neonatal investigation. Does the front bench wish to shuffle over? To the statement on the Defence Investment Plan. Secretary of State.
With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the Defence Investment Plan. Our armed forces represent the very best of us, from our sailors patrolling the high north and protecting the seabed, to our pilots, aircrew and air defence teams in the Middle East defending the skies, our paras in the South Atlantic and Marines in the Channel. And as I speak, we have personnel supporting the humanitarian mission in Venezuela, submariners beneath the waves maintaining our unbroken chain of protection, and planners, the permanent joint headquarters, making the most extraordinarily complex challenges appear routine. Our servicemen and women rightly inspire respect, gratitude and pride across this House and across the nation. We all recognise that they serve at an increasingly dangerous and unpredictable moment in history. Now, the central purpose of this Defence Investment Plan, which we published today, is to ensure that they have the kit and technology they need to do the difficult job that we ask of them. I know firsthand just how important that is, And when I was appointed Defence Secretary just a couple of weeks ago, I promised to get that right. Today, I make good on that promise. Now, before I set out that detail, I want to take the opportunity to thank the many hundreds of colleagues in the Ministry of Defence, in uniform and out, who have worked very hard to prepare this plan. Over the last few weeks, it's been a privilege to work with them, as it has been my ministerial team. In particular, I want to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the Minister for Defence, Readiness and Industry, who I know has invested many months in getting this plan right. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to place on the record my profound thanks to my right honourable friends, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, for their support and the spirit of goodwill which has guided our negotiations over the past fortnight. They have, for 2 years, demonstrated steadfast commitment to our national security, and our armed forces are today better prepared and better supported as a consequence of that. I think it's important to also make the point that Ukraine is still strong in the fight, and Britain, over the past 2 years, has proven itself to be a reliable ally and a trusted partner. I also pay tribute to my friend, the Right Honourable Member for Rawmarsh and Conisbrough, who dedicated his time as a Secretary of State and worked in order to deliver this plan. He set out to this House in clear terms why he could not support an earlier version of the plan. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will lay out what has changed and why I can. This plan now commits more investment in our armed forces, £298 billion over the next 4 years. That includes an additional £15 billion on top of last year's spending review settlement, of which most is extra day-to-day spending for training and improving availability of ships and aircraft to increase our warfighting readiness. That is £1.5 billion more than when I took up this job just a couple of weeks ago. This means that defence spending will now increase in real terms by 27% between 2023 and 2024 and 2029 and 2030. That is a bigger increase across a Parliament than any present member of this House has ever seen. It means the £74 billion allocated to our armed forces next year is now £20 billion more than the last year of the previous government. And it means by the end of this decade, the proportion of GDP spent on defence will now be higher than at any time during the last 30 years. Now, we've made some difficult but necessary decisions to fund this, but our fiscal rules have been upheld and day-to-day spending on frontline services has been protected. All departments were asked to contribute 1% of their capital budgets from this year, while those with larger resources, the DFT Roads budget and DESNES, were asked to make further contributions. Full details will be set out in a written ministerial statement today. And to reinforce this additional investment, this Labour government is announcing a new £50 billion defence export facility to support British defence firms to go out and win contracts across the globe. More money matters, of course it does, but so do the choices we make on how to spend it. And so, I have taken the decision to reprioritise a further £1 billion within the plan to ensure that it better reflects the way that war is waged today. It will provide our service personnel with the capabilities they need to deter and fight now and in the years ahead. The war in Ukraine has seen battlefield technology advance faster than at any time in our history, and few have done more to ensure our armed forces kept pace than my honourable and gallant friend, the member for Birmingham Selly-Oak. I thank him for his service and for the work that he did as a minister. He will know artificial intelligence, autonomy and uncrewed systems are no longer capabilities of the future. And through this dip, they will now receive the sustained investment that reflects their strategic importance. So today, we commit the UK's largest ever investment in drone warfare, £5 billion for strike, protector and surveillance drones across the Royal Navy, the the Army and the RAF, anti-submarine vessels, uncrewed ground vehicles and fighter jets, a new uncrewed systems task force to rapidly develop and field new autonomous capabilities, and funding for Europe's biggest drone testing site, the Uncrewed Systems Centre in Swindon, which I opened on my very first day in the job. A project which owes thanks to the efforts of my honourable friend, the member for Swindon North. We will also invest nearly £2 billion to integrate our armed forces through a new digital targeting web, underpinned by the most advanced AI and software, cutting the time from decision to strike faster than ever before. 100 million for the Defence AI Task Force and another 115 million to raise our defences against the threats from AI. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it would be reckless to ignore the lessons from Ukraine, but it is important to remember that we are not Ukraine. We are a member of NATO and a nuclear power, and just in this year, our armed forces have been deployed to the High North and the Middle East. They are now readying themselves for the prospect of regenerating Ukraine's forces and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. All the while, they protect our island home and retain the ability to respond to crises in dangerous and distant lands. Britain needs a flexible, hybrid, integrated, high-low force that can deter and fight across every domain. It's why we're committing £8.6 billion to the GCAP programme, proudly in partnership with our allies Japan and Italy. This next-generation stealth fighter jet, is in addition to the £1.1 billion Typhoon upgrade, and will ensure that our RAF retains control of the skies. We will invest £26 billion to fund the most extensive naval base upgrades for nearly half a century, including at Faslane, Portsmouth and Devonport. £790 million to protect the UK homeland and our overseas bases from air, drone and missile threats. £11 billion for munitions and weapons to increase UK stockpiles, including long-range strike capabilities, low-cost cruise missiles and one-way effectors. And by 2030, we will build at least 6 new energetics factories. Madam Deputy Speaker, today we commit £64 billion to fund Dreadnought and AUKUS submarines, a new warhead and other crucial nuclear work. Our independent nuclear deterrent is the ultimate guarantee of our security. And in providing the funding to renew it, we extend that promise long into the future. We will also purchase F-35As and join NATO's nuclear mission. Because our security is now contested in every domain, we will invest over £3 billion in space capabilities, £2.5 billion in cyber and £400 million to protect our undersea cables and pipelines. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the end, it is our people who win wars and preserve peace. With 3 above-inflation pay rises, extending childcare provision and putting fully into law the Armed Forces Covenant, this Labour government has demonstrated its commitment to what matters most. Building on the work already done to fix 1,200 of the worst homes, we today commit £9 billion over a decade to raise the condition of military family housing to a standard which matches the service and sacrifice of those living in them. Through a new Defence Housing Service, we will implement the Defence Housing Strategy in full, fulfilling our moral obligation to personnel and to their families. The DIP represents significant progress in implementing the vision set out in our Strategic Defence Review. We will invest more, target better, but there is much more work to be done. And not for nothing, the UK made a promise to our allies, as they did to us, 3.5 by 35. And in a more dangerous world, our commitment to NATO is absolute. I gave my word to the Secretary-General and to all our allies that promise will be met and a credible plan will be produced to ensure that it is. We will reach 3% in the next Parliament, with funding set out at the next spending review in which defence will be the #1 priority. Britain has always met our NATO spending commitments, and under this government, we always will. Britain has always stood with our allies, and under this government, we always will. This plan accelerates deep precision strike weapons and close support artillery with Germany. It creates an amphibious combined fleet with the Netherlands. We will also invite Jeff nations to join our Northern Navies initiative and build a hybrid force together. Madam Deputy Speaker, I now have a responsibility to make this plan work, not least given what Cabinet colleagues have forgone from their budgets in order to support mine. My commitment to them, and indeed the British public, is that with the requirement to spend more on defence comes a duty to spend more wisely on defence. So this plan includes a pledge to make substantial savings by the end of this Parliament, as well as a commitment to drive down fraud and error across defence. I am grateful to our partners in industry for their counsel and for their support during this process. I know that recent months haven't been easy, but with the DIP now published, I am relying on the full spectrum of our industrial base to make it a success. Primes and SMEs, workers and trade unions, innovators and investors. Together, we will ensure that the benefits of this plan will be felt right across the United Kingdom. We will develop sovereign and dual-use technologies, increase exports, generate growth and re-industrialise our economy. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am proud to confirm that with the publication of the DIP comes the promise of greater security for families and new opportunities for our people. According to MOD analysis, this plan will support nearly 60,000 additional good and skilled jobs right across our union. This will be achieved alongside a culture shift in procurement. Madam Deputy Speaker, ultimately the success of this defence investment plan will be measured by whether it commands the support of those amazing men and women who serve in our armed forces. They remain our most important asset, respected by those who stand with us, feared by those who stand against us. We know that they are equal to any task, and with this defence investment plan, we give them the means to match their courage. I commend this statement to the House.
Secretary of State, it is good form to let the Speaker's office know if one is going to speak over the allocated time. I will now have to give extra time to the other front benches as well. Shadow Secretary of State, James Cartley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, after months and months of delay, finally we have the Defence Investment Plan, but it's quite simply a case of too little, too late. Too little because there's virtually no more cash than the plan, which led the previous Secretary of State to resign because he believed it would make the country, and I quote, less safe. Too late, not just because the plan is months overdue, but also because much of the capability it contains won't be in service until the 2030s, when the threat we face is right now. For members opposite who don't agree that this plan is too little, they don't need to take my word for it. The Chief of the Defence Staff said he needed £28 billion to fund the armed forces over the next 4 years. This plan is barely half that requirement. And their own Secretary of State for Defence, until a few weeks ago, said that the proposed spending, and I quote, falls well short of what is required for defence and the country at this dangerous time. Because, he said, and I quote, it rises to just 2.68% of GDP in 2030. 2.68% of GDP, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State to confirm that the GDP figure for defence in 2030 under his revised plan remains unchanged, 2.68%. Exactly. Which begs the obvious question. If 2.68% by 2030 was a resigning matter for the previous Defence Secretary, why is it good enough for him? But this dip is not just too little financially, it's too late. For members opposite who don't agree, they should remember that it was promised for last autumn and is now 10 months overdue. Most importantly, the drones Labour promised in today's headlines mainly enter service in the 2030s, when the threat we face is today. Autonomous drones to fly with the Apache, uncrewed surface and underwater vessels, the prototype for the RAF's autonomous fighter jet. all entering service in the 2030s, far too late in this fast-changing world of tech-driven warfare. On that subject, it was ironic that the Prime Minister announced the dip at Malloy Aeronautics in Maidenhead, where I also launched the MOD's first ever defence drone strategy back in February 2024. But back then, we were world leaders in drone warfare, having supplied Ukraine with cutting-edge drone capabilities that were not on a press release, but real kit used on a real front line against Europe's peer military threat, the Russian armed forces. So what happened? Labour came to power and put all that progress on hold, paralysing procurement, whilst we waited first for the Strategic Defence Review and then for the dip. But the big question, why all the dither and delay? In a word, money. Isn't the harsh truth that those drones could come into service far sooner, but the government are unwilling to commit the cash before the 2030s? Isn't this the inevitable result of a Prime Minister unwilling to cut welfare, prioritising a bigger benefits bill over properly funding defence? Which begs the next question, Madam Deputy Speaker. Where's the Right Honourable Member for Makerfield in all this?
Where is it?
Can the Secretary of State tell us if the putative Prime Minister has been consulted on the dip, and most importantly, has he given it his blessing? If not, is the dip even worth the paper it's written on? Madam Deputy Speaker, it is rumoured that the current Prime Minister may have ambitions to be the next Secretary-General of NATO. If this is true, might it have been advisable to include in the dip a funded plan to get to 3% on defence? So can the Secretary of State tell us in which financial year Labour will spend 3% on defence? And finally, for all the focus on drones, our people remain our most important capability. Not just our regular personnel, our reserves and their families, but our cadets and our veterans. Now, I was proud to make the decision to buy back the Defence Estate from Annington, a deal the previous Labour government left untouched. But given that I thought we all wanted to deliver homes for heroes, Madam Deputy Speaker, can he confirm, it's a critical question, it's about the accommodation of those who serve our country, can he confirm that the Defence Investment Plan includes cutting hundreds of millions of pounds from the budget for forces housing, shifting it from this Parliament into the 2030s? Can he confirm that's the case? And can he confirm that he is also cutting cadet funding at the same time and over the same time period? Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on veterans, and I hope he's had a chance to think about this after my previous question, does he agree that a top priority for the new Prime Minister must be to back our former soldiers and scrap the Northern Ireland Trumpets bill? To conclude, after months of dither and delay, it's taken the sudden end of his premiership for the Prime Minister to finally publish the dip in a desperate search for a legacy. But it's a legacy of failure. An underfunded defence investment plan, too little, too late. The men and women of our armed forces deserve much better.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Defence Secretary talks about legacy. So let me remind him that under the previous government cut back by almost 50,000 our service personnel. The morale of our troops was through the floor. 46 of the biggest 52 projects were delayed or over budget. And there was an equipment plan without the funding to back it up. I'm also, I have to say, quite perplexed that he wants to raise concerns about the announcement that we've made with regard to drones. We've just literally announced the largest ever investment in drones in our country's history. And when he gets the time, and I know because he will want to look carefully at the detail, he will see that over the past 2 weeks, we've reprioritised activity in order to bring forward spend so that we can deliver operational capability sooner than otherwise would be the case. He did mention housing, and I understand why he would want to raise that, because housing is hugely important for defence and for the armed forces community, and I know what it's like to live in armed forces accommodation. And I said in my earlier remarks that we absolutely have a moral responsibility to those who serve to ensure that we are able to provide them with the best possible living accommodations. That is why we have recommitted today to £9 billion of investment over the next 10 years. That will see investment in the housing estate growing each year in real terms over the next 10 years. That is an absolute commitment that we've made today. He also mentioned, and I understand again why he chose to do so, the importance of cadet forces. All of us in our constituencies will no doubt engage with cadet forces. They are an absolute force for good in communities around the country. And that is why we've made a clear commitment to continue to invest and modernise in our cadet forces to continue to improve outstanding opportunities for young people. He asked specifically about the percentage of GDP that we will be spending on defence. I would just gently point out to him that when we came into government 2 years ago, we inherited a figure of 2.3%. That was the figure that we inherited. It's currently at 2.5% and will be at 2.7% by the end of this Parliament, with a clear commitment to spend 3% in the next Parliament and an absolute critical commitment to spend 3.5% by 2035. The member opposite will have heard the points that I made about the importance of defence spending and the commitment that this government has made to ensuring that defence spending is the #1 priority at the next spending review.
Healy.
Thank you, Speaker. We all want this defence investment plan to be a success, and can I personally thank the MOD officials who have worked so hard for many months to get us to this point, and can I welcome the extra money the Treasury may have seeded in the last couple of weeks. It builds on what has been the record increase in defence investment that we as a Labour government have made since the election. Yeah. But threats are still growing. Demands on defence are still rising in this dangerous world, and today's step means that we will be spending as a nation 2.7% of GDP on defence in 2030, the date that NATO now warns we could face a Russian attack. So with European security at stake, would my right honourable friends agree that more needs to be done in the months ahead, beyond the dip, to develop a clear, credible funding plan that will hit 3% and that will meet our NATO commitment of 3.5% by 2035?
Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for his service in government. He did an excellent job as Defence Secretary, and I aim absolutely to build on the work that he did. I know that he will share the pride that this government has in the commitment that we have already made, 298 billion over the next 4 years, £15 billion of new money in this plan, and with an increase in defence spending in real terms by 27% up to 29-30. But he's right, we do need to do more. We will need to spend more on defence, and that's why there was a clear commitment that that will be a #1 priority at the next spending review. We have an absolute obligation to our armed forces and to our allies. When I talk to my NATO allies, they look to the United Kingdom for leadership. That is leadership that we have provided over a number of years, including under the previous government, but it is a leadership that this government will continue to provide.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson James McCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement, albeit 14 months late and one Defence Secretary later. The Liberal Democrats welcome investment in technologies reshaping warfare in Ukraine and beyond. Our armed forces must be more agile and better equipped to the threats we face. But let's be clear. This defence investment plan is too little, too late. After years of Conservative neglect, Britain needed a government willing to match the scale of the challenge. Instead, we've had months of delay and now a plan that still appears to have a significant gap between the ambition and the resources required. It is hugely concerning to see how little, in particular, is allocated to air defence, hundreds of millions short of what was recommended in the Strategic Defence Review, inadequate to protect our islands and, indeed, our allies. The Prime Minister himself has warned that Russia could pose a direct threat to NATO by 2030. Yet the architects of the Strategic Defence Review, General Sir Richard Barrons and former Labour Defence Secretary and NATO Secretary General Lord Robertson, have both made clear that the current funding is not enough. Just weeks ago, the Defence Secretary resigned because he believed the funding settlement on offer was not sufficient to keep Britain safe. The new settlement does not bridge that gap, and yet the new Defence Secretary claims it is enough. So were both the experts and the former Defence Secretary wrong about this? Or does the Defence Secretary truly believe this is enough funding to keep Britain safe? Liberal Democrats have welcomed plans to sort out the sorry state of forces housing. So it is really concerning to hear reports that funding is being found by raiding existing defence budgets, including for military housing. If that is true, what message does the Secretary of State have for serving personnel and their families still living in mouldy homes? Is this genuinely new investment or simply moving money from one overstretched budget to another? Madam Deputy Speaker, the last thing our armed forces and defence industry need is more uncertainty. Between delays to the DIP, a change of defence ministers and now a new Prime Minister incoming, they have already dealt with a lot. It is reported that the Right Honourable Member for Makerfield, who looks certain to become the Prime Minister in the coming weeks, is sympathetic to the Liberal Democrat plan for defence bonds. Despite the Prime Minister appearing to rule it out in his speech today, can the Secretary of State confirm whether defence bonds are at least under consideration to provide the injection of funding our armed forces so desperately need?
Secretary of State.
Well, I would just gently say to the honourable member opposite that when his party was in coalition government with the Conservative Party, defence was cut by 22%. So we're all judged by our record and by the actions that we take. And today's defence investment plan represents a real terms increase in defence spending by, he can shake his head, but it is a statement of truth that this plan, which represents 298 billion of investment over the next 4 years, represents an increase in real terms by 27% by 2030. He spoke about housing. I hope that he heard the words that I spoke earlier about the absolute commitment to our armed forces to make sure that they've got a standard of accommodation that is absolutely fitting for the nature of the service that they undertake. That's why we've made a commitment of £9 billion over 10 years. I remember living in armed forces accommodation that hadn't been properly maintained. We have a duty and a responsibility to do so, and that's why we're investing a very significant amount of money. He spoke about defence bonds. Of course, we will look at all suggestions that people have about how we can do things differently, but in the end, all of this money has to be accounted for, and we have to be responsible in terms of bringing forward a defence investment plan that is properly costed. That is what we have done. We have brought forward very significant amounts of resource, but he said that I claimed it was enough. I think that's slightly unfair of him to characterise my earlier remarks in that regard. I am crystal clear about the fact that today represents a massive investment in our armed forces and in our technology that they will be deploying and employing. But that is not to say that we don't need to do more. We do need to do more, and that's precisely why I made the point that we need defence spending to be the #1 priority at the next spending review.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank the Secretary of State and his collective team for all of the work that's gone into the Defence Investment Plan. I also welcome the increase in spending. There are a multitude of lessons from Ukraine that we've all heard much about. One is on scale and capacity, and both Russia and Ukraine's industrial capability of where they're now building 1.1 million drones every 2 months. Could the Secretary of State outline to the House the percentage of the defence budget, and particularly the equipment plan that has been spent on uncrewed systems, and whether that is docked into the defence industrial strategy?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable and gallant friend for the work that he has done in this particular area, and I know that he has a particular percentage in mind, and I'm keen to discuss it more with him. I hope that he will acknowledge today, though, that this DIP brings forward the largest ever investment in drone warfare. 150 million more for Homeland counter-drone defences, 50 million more over the next 12 months for the Army's Task Force Rapstone, 150 million for a new uncrewed vehicle programme for the Army, 150 million for the Royal Marine Commandos with the same hybrid model of crewed and autonomous insertion craft and drones. So I hope that he will acknowledge that over the past couple of weeks there has been a refocusing, a sharpening of the plan in order to ensure that we learn the lessons from Ukraine. But I know, because he's been around the block a bit, that he will also understand that whilst we must learn the lessons from Ukraine, we are not Ukraine, and we still have other responsibilities as a major power within NATO. And that's why what I have to do is make sure that we've got a balanced set of capabilities, and I'm confident that that is the balance that we've achieved today.
Father of the House, I believe.
Many wonder whether aircraft carriers are going to go the way of the old battleships, uniquely vulnerable to drones costing a tiny fraction of their cost. But to protect aircraft carriers, you need destroyers and frigates. Moreover, in 2 world wars, we relied completely on destroyers and frigates to protect our food supply. So will the Secretary of State say more about the replacement of our ageing frigate and destroyer fleet, particularly with regard to Type 45 and Type 83 destroyers?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the Father of the House, not least because it gives me the opportunity to pay tribute to all of those who serve at sea, doing extraordinary work in the service of the Royal Navy. As an island nation, the capabilities that they provide are mission critical for us. And that's why between now and the end of 2030, we expect the Royal Navy to take delivery of 5 new warships and the final Astute-class attack submarine. And in the same period, we will bring our first large autonomous surface and subsurface autonomous platforms into service. Those who serve in the Royal Navy do exceptional work on behalf of our nation, and we will make sure that they have the resources and the capabilities that they need to keep our country safe.
Select Committee Chair Dan Jarvis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for the ministerial briefing beforehand and for allowing Defence Committee members advance sight of the Defence Investment Plan. I welcome also that we now have a fully funded plan backed by Treasury, which is scalable for key facets such as housing, training, workforce recovery, AI, housing, integrated air and missile defence and munition stockpiles. However, there is no clear pathway to reach 3% of GDP spend. And despite assurances that the DIP would go further than previous defence equipment plans, it actually contains less detail. There is no full 10-year expenditure plan. There is no breakdown between procurement and support costs. And much of the investment appears to be backloaded beyond 2030. So can my right honourable friend commit to fight for more funding for defence so that we reach the 3% of GDP spend by 2030? Will he commit to building more in Britain to stimulate sovereignty and economic growth? Also, thirdly, what operational risks have been accepted in the interim while there are being cuts to investment in certain areas, and when will our committee be furnished with the full details so that effective parliamentary scrutiny can be undertaken?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee for the scrutiny that I know that he will apply to this important piece of work. He reeled off a number of different capabilities, and I'm very happy to discuss those with him in more detail. The essence of his question was seeking an assurance that I will commit to fight for the funding that defence needs. Of course, I will give him that commitment. It is my job now to make sure that we've got the resources that we need to field the kind of capabilities required to keep our country safe at a point of great challenge. That does involve working very closely with our NATO allies. That does involve providing them with the certainty of our long-term commitment towards defence funding. And it will require us to show a trajectory to the 3.5% commitment that we have made. He's also right to raise the point about backing Britain. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor and other ministerial colleagues have been absolutely clear that whilst, of course, we need to provide additional resource in order to provide the capabilities we need, but we also need to do that in a way which ensures that we are best able to grow our economy and create and sustain good, well-paid defence jobs right around the United Kingdom. That is an absolute priority for me, and I give him an assurance that we'll work closely with him on it.
Julie Lewis.
At last we have agreement on a defence expenditure statistic when the Secretary of State says that what the settlement means is by the end of this decade, the proportion of GDP spent on defence will now be higher than at any time during the last 30 years. He's quite right. The trouble is, if you go back 30 years to 1995, what we were spending then under the new accounting rules was 3% of GDP. And that was 6 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Given that we are now in a more dangerous situation today than at any time since at least the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, shouldn't we be looking at the sort of percentages we spent then? Under the new accounting rules, that was between 4.1% and 5.5%. Haven't we still got a long way to go?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman knows that I always listen very carefully to what he has to say, not least because he talks a lot of good sense on these matters. And I remember over many years him being sat on this side of the House, me sat on that side of the House, listening to the case that he has made over a very long period of time for investment in defence, including investment in nuclear. And I know, therefore, that he will welcome the £63 billion over the next 4 years to strengthen the UK's nuclear deterrent. He's spoken with great consistency on these matters over many, many years. He's right to say that there is still work to do in order to point the trajectory to 3.5%. I think today is a very significant step forward in terms of providing additional resource and additional capability. The £298 billion is a very significant commitment by this government. When we came into office 2 years ago, the percentage of GDP was at 2.3%. We have increased that. We're on a trajectory to increase it over the next few years. And we need to make sure that through the next spending review process, we've got the resource that I think most honourable and right honourable members agree that we now need to chart that course to 3.5%. That is an absolute commitment that we will honour, and we will work closely with our NATO allies in order to do so.
West Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, this government wouldn't have such an uphill mountain to climb were it not for the decisions taken by our predecessors. And I really think the Conservatives would have more credibility if they acknowledged that fact more readily and with more humility than they've shown today. And on every previous occasion, the Shadow Secretary of State's been at the dispatch box. Nonetheless, as the Secretary of State himself has acknowledged, we do need to go further, we do need to go faster, and what we have here is a good foundation to build on, but there's more to do. With that in mind, can the Secretary of State set out the government's rationale for not joining the Defence, Security and Resilience Bank, and will he reconsider?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I mean, we will look carefully at the best possible mechanisms in order to ensure that we've got the resource that we need to field the capability that is required. There are different views about how best to do that, and there are different allies advocating for different ways of investing money in our defence industries. I know that he will understand that I've not had a huge amount of time in a couple of weeks that I've been drawing this plan together to map out the longer-term spending proposals in terms of how we best generate that activity across defence and with our economy. I'm not ruling anything out or ruling anything in, but I will look closely at what our allies say, take advice, and very happy to discuss it with him further.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It would appear that this defence investment plan is unaffordable, but the PAC will be examining that fact. Deep in this plan is an old accountant's trick, a efficiency savings figure, a vast efficiency savings figure of 10.7 billion. Does the plan rely on that figure? If not, what is the incentive to make efficiency savings over the plan?
The plan is affordable, and that is one of the differences between this government and the last. But I welcome the scrutiny that he will no doubt apply to it. We've looked very carefully, as honourable members would expect, at how we are able to fund this. And what nobody on this side of the House wanted to do was bring forward spending commitments that we weren't able to evidence how we're going to pay for them. That's what we've done, but very happy to discuss it with him further.
Michelle Scroggin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome that this government is prioritising the delivery of our nuclear deterrent, including investment not only in the current, but those all-important future submarine programmes. Now, the Shadow Secretary of State has said too little too late. Well, the price that the Liberal Democrats demanded for the coalition government of 2010 was not renewing our nuclear deterrent, and the Conservatives were happy to pay that price. So yes, they're really bloody late. Part of the cost of that decision is being paid by our submariners, forced to remain at sea for over 200 days in that ageing fleet. Now, we've got to be honest with the people of Great Britain. Our food supply chains are being tested, our energy infrastructure is being mapped, our MOD is under a cyber attack every day. If we're not telling them the truth, would the Secretary of State agree that they would be more willing to go with those really difficult decisions if we were actually honest with them?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. She does a fantastic job representing her constituents, and I pay tribute to the incredibly important work that they do on behalf of the nation. I'm very keen to come and visit her constituency. I look forward to continuing these conversations with her. She's right to make the points in the way that she has done. The nuclear deterrent is an absolutely vital capability that underpins our national security, and we're hugely grateful to all those who make that happen on behalf of the nation, including, of course, her constituents.
Andrew Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Daring class and Sea Viper are due to be retired from the mid-2030s, and the plan is, as I understand it from the DIP, that the Common Combat Vessel and its slave drone vessels, the Type 91 and 94, will come in to replace it as our principal means of doing hybrid maritime air defence. Given that that simply is a concept at this stage, little more than the concept, what confidence does the Secretary of State have that we will not still be reliant upon the Daring class, and has he made contingency for extending her in service so that we're not left undefended?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to him, and I'd be very happy to have a more detailed conversation with him offline about the points that he made. He will know that there is a massive programme of transformation that's been set out by the first Sea Lord in recent times. Clearly, we're working through the detail of all of that to ensure and satisfy ourselves that we've got the right capabilities. But as I said earlier, I do want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to all of those who serve in our armed forces, particularly those who serve at sea in the way that he described. This is an important capability, and we will make sure that we've got the right capabilities in the right place at the right time.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've had the opportunity to oversee or look over the Defence Equipment Plan over the last 13 or so years, and we see repeatedly a profiling over a decade with huge optimism that savings and efficiencies will come down the line, and that's how it gets across the line of affordability. So will the Secretary of State commit to making sure that there's proper parliamentary scrutiny of this through the Public Accounts Committee, the Defence Select Committee, and hopefully next week, if the ministers can be agreed to attend, to come to a meeting of the Treasury Select Committee with Defence Select Committee colleagues from both the Treasury and the Ministry of Defence?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the chair of the Select Committee who makes important points. I know that she will have heard my earlier comments about the requirement when spending more on defence to also spend more wisely. And I am acutely conscious of the reputation of defence procurement spending going back generations. We absolutely do need to do much better, and we are on a process of transition to ensure that we do. I'm very keen to work closely with her and her committee to make sure that they have the opportunity to provide the scrutiny on behalf of this House that I think would be constructively helpful to the process, and the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry will be very pleased to appear in front of her committee next week.
Barclay.
The Strategic Defence Review highlighted the importance of the active reserve, but the Defence Investment Plan shows there's no increase at all in numbers this Parliament. It's not even mentioned, remarkably, in the land section. And even the commitment on something like Cadets made less than a year ago, in August last year, has been shelved. So can the Secretary of State at least confirm to reservists watching this that their reserve service days this year will be fully protected?
Secretary of State.
Grateful to him, not least because it provides the opportunity to pay tribute to those who serve in our reserves, whom I am in awe that they are able to balance their commitment to our nation with other professional occupations and family life. And that is a commitment that is hugely valued by this government, as I know it was by the previous one. There is, I think from memory, a reference in, I think, page 62 of the People section. I'm advised, but I can tell him that essentially we will maintain the vision as set out in the SDR, but we want to do everything that we can to make sure that those people who want to step forward and serve in the reserves have an opportunity to do so.
Emma Lowell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. I do worry, though, that scrapping the Type 83s that were due to replace our Type 45 destroyers and be the backbone of our fleet in favour of a hybrid, uncrewed, autonomous Navy is a gamble. Unmanned service vessels of this size are untested, especially in the high north. I recognise the immense potential for the new hybrid Navy fleet in persistently monitoring the Russian threat, but can my right honourable friend assure me that unmanned and disaggregated replacements for our Type 45 destroyers will be as effective in providing not just strike capabilities, but the deterrent presence needed as well?
Well, I'm grateful to her. And of course, we need to make sure that we learn the lessons from Ukraine and elsewhere in terms of the kind of capability that we field. I think in terms of the specific capability that she's referenced, there wasn't a budget line attached to it. And therefore, as part of the transition to the hybrid Navy, the First Sea Lord has set out an alternative vision for how we're going to field that kind of capability. But hopefully she will see from the investment and the commitment that we've made through the Defence Investment Plan that we are absolutely committed to ensuring that as an island nation we retain the Royal Navy capabilities that we need now and in the future. They are vital to the defence of our nation, and we will always make sure that we've got the right kit in the right place at the right time.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Defence Investment Plan includes an additional £100 million transformation of the Royal Marines Commando Forces, with a special focus on our allies in Scandinavia and the Eye North. With the Royal Marines Commando Logistic Regiment based at Royal Marines Base Chivenor in my constituency of North Devon, can the Secretary of State tell us what form that transformation will take?
Well, can I thank him for his service? And I know that he has constituency interests in these matters. I think he might have been referring to the £150 million that has been announced for the Royal Marine Commandos in terms of the same hybrid model of crewed and autonomous insertion craft and drones, a bit of a mouthful. This is important capability, and it also provides me with the opportunity, and I have made this point previously, but I'd like to reiterate it, to say what an extraordinary job Royal Marines did in the English Channel a couple of weekends ago, interdicting a Russian Shadow Fleet vessel. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude. They do extraordinary work, and this government has a huge responsibility to make sure that they've got the right capabilities. Either myself or one of my ministers would be very happy to discuss the technical detail further, though.
Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. £63 billion this investment plan lays out this country will spend on our nuclear deterrent over the next few years. But that's not just to keep the UK safe. We offer that as an umbrella protection across our European NATO allies. That is a massive point. It's extremely expensive. It's more than some entire government departments will get. And it's huge, and we should celebrate it. So can the Secretary of State assure me that when he travels to Turkey for the NATO Assembly soon, and he travels with the Prime Minister, when we do come under some pressure, because we haven't laid out how we're going to hit 3% soon enough, that point is made gently to our friends and allies that actually we are spending a huge amount of money keeping them safe.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable and gallant friend. I think he does make an important point, and it's right to emphasise that in the context of NATO, we are the third largest spenders of resource on defence spending. He's right to point out about the 63 billion that's been committed over the next 4 years. That is a very large figure, and it's a very significant commitment. But as he will know very well, not least because his constituents benefit from that investment, it also means good, skilled jobs for people right around the country, including in his constituency.
Sir N. Duncan Smith.
Deputy Speaker, isn't the reality, I say to the Secretary of State, that the plan that he's put forward barely scrapes into 2.7%, not 3%, and leaves us £9.3 billion short every single year of this process? And I say to him that with all of that and not achieving our target, how in heaven's names does he think, if he's not going to achieve 3% in the period that he was asked for, 2030, how is he ever going to achieve the NATO minimum, de minimis, of 35? It's not going to happen. In 35, he will not get 3.5% out of this budget, won't he? Will he give us the dates?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't agree with the right honourable gentleman. The Defence Investment Plan represents a very significant commitment from this government into defence spending, nearly 300 billion over the next 4 years. 15 billion of new money within this plan. And he's heard the point that I've made about the real term spending increase by 27%. I've been very clear about the need to spend more on defence. And I've been very clear about the fact that it will be the next spending review that will provide the resource required to chart the trajectory from 3% to 3.5%. I agree with him. That is precisely what our allies want to see. And I'm confident that we will make good on that commitment in the context of the next spending review.
Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today is a step forward and a down payment on the future of towns like mine in Aldershot and Farnborough. But as much as we wrangle over percentages of GDP, on the ground we still lack the industrial capacity to actually spend this money and build more. Defence companies in my patch and across the supply chain cannot access the finance they need to hire more people and expand production, which is why I've been campaigning for over a year for the UK to join the Defence, Security and Resilience Bank. Does the Secretary of State recognise this challenge, and what are we going to do to increase our industrial capacity?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and it was an absolute pleasure to be in her constituency at the weekend for Armed Forces Day. Aldershot is the home of the British Army, and she's done a fantastic job representing her constituents and her constituency. She's right to raise the point in the way that she does about defence finance, and I can tell her and the House that the defence finance and investment strategy will be published in the autumn.
Dave Dugan.
Speaker, this defence investment plan is 300 days late and £13 billion short. It ensures we fall further behind our allies and a greater exposure to those that would seek to do us harm, and it leaves us falling short of our NATO commitments. But that £13 billion is just 1 year of the defence nuclear enterprise cost, £13 billion. As the Secretary of State seeks to fund his plans from the Scottish Government's budget, amongst many other departmental budgets, what savings has he sought to make from the defence nuclear enterprise, which is the ultimate case of fur coat and nae knickers?
Secretary of State.
Well, firstly, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me acknowledge the very important contribution that Scotland makes to our national security. And he should know that billions of pounds of UK investment is going into Faslane and to other capabilities that will provide benefit in terms of growth and jobs for his constituents and people right across Scotland. I would just gently say to him that I wonder perhaps what the Defence Investment Plan would be for an independent Scotland, which is what he would want.
Narendra Mishra.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State is right to say that the benefits of this plan will be felt right across the UK, increase exports, generate growth and re-industrialise our economy. I'm proud to represent KNDS in Stockport. They manufacture military bridges and armoured vehicle Boxer, and the Minister for Defence Readiness visited me in October for a factory tour. I'm grateful to him. Can the Secretary of State ensure that the benefits of this investment are felt right across the UK, including in Stockport, Greater Manchester? And Stockport is just a short drive from Barnsley. Will he join me on a visit to KNDS?
Just a yes, Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful to him for the representations he's made on behalf of KNDS, and I understand well the important work that they do. He's right to emphasise the importance of ensuring that this very significant investment, this new £15 billion sitting alongside the other continuum of investment that we've seen, does need to provide economic growth and jobs right across the country. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is what it will do. It will provide nearly 60,000 new jobs. That is something that we should be hugely proud of, not least because a very significant proportion of those jobs will be spread right around the country. In terms of visiting his Stockport constituency, I'd be very pleased to do that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. More money for defence is a good thing, so I welcome the Secretary of State's Defence Investment Plan. He did, though, say, in terms of 3.5%, that I'm confident that we will make good on that commitment in the next spending review. And I don't know why he's so confident, because the current Prime Minister won't be the Prime Minister, the current Chancellor won't be the Chancellor, and dare I say it, the current Secretary of State may not be the current Secretary of State.
And so he would be able to give us, industry, our enemies, the markets, the whole country a great deal more confidence if he would answer the question from the Shadow Secretary of State and tell us whether the member for Makerfield has signed this off.
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can be confident because I can have confidence in the long-standing record and history of Labour governments investing in defence. It's that gives me confidence.
Jonathan Davies.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this record investment in defence, and I appreciate that this may lead us to making cuts elsewhere in public expenditure. One casualty may be the expansion of the A38 in Derby, which was on and off under successive governments for the last 40 years. Now, some local people would welcome that scheme not going ahead, particularly on environmental grounds, but others will see that cancellation as a brake on economic growth. Now, we need economic growth to fund our defence, so will the Secretary of State work with me to influence the Treasury and DFT that we need more investment in Derby so that our economy is thriving and we can contribute to defence through public expenditure in the future?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to him. Tough choices have had to be made. And as I mentioned earlier, Treasury colleagues will set out the detail of the spending choices today in a written ministerial statement. I know that he will understand that given the nature of the world in which we're operating, the government has an absolute responsibility to ensure that we make those tough choices. We reprioritise resource and activity in order to best safeguard the security of our nation. That is what we've had to do in this defence investment plan. That has involved some tough choices, but that is the right way to proceed.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just return to the question of the efficiency savings that are forecast to be made in this document? 10.7 billion, which is 7 billion out of resource spending and 3.7 out of capital. And apart from some very vague headings, there is no indication in this document about where that money is going to be saved. Can he do a written statement as soon as possible to set out exactly how these savings are going to be made? Or I rather agree with the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, the Chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, that we've all seen these accounting tricks before, and under previous governments of both colours, and these savings are very rarely made. So you'll have to factor that in to the negotiations with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, whoever that may be, in the forthcoming spending round. And I take that to be a very significant point he's made about the next spending round.
Well, I always welcome the contributions of the Right Honourable Gentleman, not least because they are always thoughtful and constructive. I understand why he's raised the point in the way that he has. Resetting the programme to deliver this transformation has forced some challenging but necessary decisions involving the cutting of consultants and the cutting of the civil service headcount by 15%, as well as an increased use of technology to drive innovation. There have been some tough choices. I thought it was the right thing to do to be honest about those, but very happy to discuss them with him further.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Modern warfare has evolved from traditional mass troops to online cyber and drone-enabled conflict. We've seen this from the attack on M&S and Jaguar Land Rover. And last September, I saw firsthand at a drone factory in Ukraine. How is the government using the Defence Investment Plan to develop our own sovereign digital and technological capabilities learned from Ukraine's war?
Secretary of State.
Well, she's absolutely right to raise concerns in the way that she has, not least in terms of the threat that we face every single day from cyber. In my previous role, I spent a lot of time ensuring that we were coordinated across government, the Cabinet Office, the Home Office and other government departments. This Defence Investment Plan provides the resource to make sure that we have the right resource and the right capabilities to meet the emerging threat that we are dealing with on a daily basis. Cyber is a key point of that, and what I've done is refocus and sharpen some of the capabilities in order to be able to deploy them sooner than would otherwise have been the case. There's always a balance between the shorter and the longer term, but I'm confident this plan gives us the right capabilities when we need them.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a tale of two dips. The first dip is covered by the period in the current spending review up to about 2030, and the second dip is the bit beyond that from 2030 to 2035. And the first has detailed spending commitments and the latter has quite vague spending commitments. The former has small investments and the latter has big investments. I'll give you two examples. Air, 28 billion versus 70 billion. Land, 19 billion versus 36 billion. So can the Secretary of State guarantee to the House on behalf of the government, no matter who might be in it by that point, that the Treasury has guaranteed those figures and they will be in the next spending review? That is, that the defence section of the next spending review has already been written.
Secretary of State.
Well, with great respect to him, I know that he will understand it isn't for me to make guarantees on behalf of other government departments, including, of course, the Treasury. I don't think any minister would be in a position to do that outside of the Treasury. What I can guarantee him, I know that he thinks carefully about these matters, what I can guarantee him is that in the time that I've had available, I've looked very carefully at the mix of capabilities contained within the plan. I have made a number of changes in order to deliver capabilities that I thought were required sooner rather than later. Has that involved making some difficult choices? Yes, it has. Has it involved cutting some capabilities? Yes, it has. But what I have to do is right by defence and satisfy myself with the resource that we've got available, that we put the right capabilities in place that will allow us to operate alongside our allies in a very dangerous world. That is not an easy process, which I hope that he will acknowledge, but I hope that he will also acknowledge that today's investment plan does represent an important step forward, but as I have consistently said, there is still a requirement to spend more on defence.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, can I thank the Secretary of State for the opportunity to actually read the DIP this morning in the reading room, and there'll be some important questions that will need to be answered on that. Now, it's clear that the last government left the armed forces in a poor state, and this government has been doing all it can to try and repair some of that. But for me, the key question is this. Given the threats we face today, both globally and in Europe, and the state of the world economy and other threats that exist, does this meet those threats and provide us with the security and defence capability that this country should need at this time? And my view is that it clearly doesn't. And I think we've got to make a much greater contribution in the sense we need to get to 3% by the end of this Parliament. We need to start a plan to get that. Otherwise, I'll just finish on this, Madam Speaker, it also leaves a great deal of uncertainty in the defence industrial base about their ability to ramp up and meet those requirements and upskill as well.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to him, not least for the work that he does on the Intelligence and Security Committee and his previous service in the department. So I take very seriously the points that he's made. And he's right to highlight the nature of the threats that we face as a country. That's why, in addition to the work that we're doing with defence, it's incredibly important that we ensure that activity is joined up across government to ensure that wider resilience and that wider societal response. And that is work underway with the Cabinet Office. He did make a point about uncertainty with regard to industry. The truth of the matter is that the publication of this plan today will ensure that there is greater certainty for our industry partners who we now want to work closely with. We rely on them to be able to manufacture the capabilities that we require to keep our country safe. This is a big shot in the arm for UK industries. I look forward to working very closely with the defence industries in the months and hopefully years to come in order to make sure that we are buying British, that we are taking their capabilities and deploying them to meet the nature of the threat that we face.
Sir Desmond Swain.
In what year will we reach 3%?
Secretary of State.
In the next Parliament.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Reindustrialisation and backing British are the hallmarks of this defence investment plan. Does the Secretary of State agree with me and with GMB and the Unite Unions that it's not only ships that need to be built in Britain, it's also new floating docks for Faslane? So will he agree that Project Euston should be built by the skilled workforce at the Methil Yard in my constituency?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to him for his advocacy of this very important programme, which I've been briefed on and have already discussed it with the General Secretary of the GMB. I know that he will understand that I need to look very carefully at the detail of it, and therefore I'm not in a position to make a commitment about it from the dispatch box. A decision will be forthcoming, but I'm very keen to discuss it with him further.
Danny Kruger.
Madam
Mr. Speaker, with this new money, the defence budget is due to rise by about £17 billion a year over the next 4 years. In that same period, the welfare budget is going to rise by about £60 billion. That's almost the whole defence budget just in the increase in welfare spending. General Barrons, who co-authored the Government Strategic Defence Review, said in response to today's announcement that we are not keeping up with our allies or with our enemies. So does he acknowledge that the government has failed to fund the Strategic Defence Review and has left us dangerously exposed, particularly at sea? He talks about spending wisely. How much of the money, Madam Deputy Speaker, how much of the money that the government has announced is going to be spending will go on SMEs, not on the big primes that have delivered us programmes like Ajax?
Well, I genuinely welcome a question from the honourable member, not least because it is often the case that there are no members of his party in attendance for defence debates. I just sort of say gently to him that he, I think, has previously made the point that he represents more members of the armed forces in his constituency than anyone else. I therefore think not unreasonable to have a sort of slightly more constructive dialogue about these things. I hope he will consider that for the future.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the home of the Royal Navy, Portsmouth welcomes Defence Investment Plan. Investment in hybrid navy, at least 6 new warships, and the biggest upgrade to our naval base for 45 years. It will strengthen national security in a new era of warfare and support skilled jobs. But ships and technology, Madam Deputy Speaker, are not enough. So will the Minister meet with me to set out how the government will ensure the necessary skills and training are in place to build and sustain this high-tech force, and confirm that he will continue to work at pace to improve armed forces housing and keep our personnel at the heart of this plan?
Secretary of State.
Well, she's right to raise the importance of our people and making sure that they are properly supported. I know that as a local member of Parliament for Portsmouth, she takes these matters very seriously, and of course, yes, we'd be delighted to meet with her.
Dr Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In response to the dip, the Noble Lord Hutton, a former Labour Defence Secretary, said the centres of resistance across Whitehall to extra defence spending have allowed to prosper, and they haven't been overcome. As a consequence, he went on to say that our armed forces will not be war ready by the end of this Parliament. Does the Defence Secretary disagree with the Noble Lord, and how does the cuts of £10.7 billion to the MOD budget enhance our armed forces readiness?
Secretary of State.
Well, I pay tribute to Lord Hutton for the work that he did when he was the Defence Secretary, and of course we listen very carefully to all those who take a view about the policies that we've brought forward. But I think it is not unreasonable to reiterate